department, and then we'll finish up with non-departmental. And that will conclude our presentations so that we then can move into deliberations. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to Carla to finish up community health centers.
Good morning. I'm back. Thanks for having me. Last time, before I get started in going through our goals, which is where we left off last time, I just wanted to share with you the handouts that I provided this morning, just to talk us just briefly about what that is. So I thought it would be helpful as you deliberate and think about our budgets and the goals that we've put in place that are quite aggressive for the CHCs, that you can see some examples of how we're monitoring our performance along the way. The first handout, though, is a follow-up from Commissioner Ogero's request around our 340B pharmacy utilization over the years. And so it's just a quick visual that shows you where we were in our 2018 year versus where we're at 2021. I'm still pulling our information for 22-23. So I'll provide that as a follow-up to this follow-up. But what you'll see is that we did have a 45% growth in our financial revenues from our pharmacy, from our 340B, when we set those targets in 2018. So from 2018 to today, you'll see a real substantial climb, and then you'll see a continuous smaller climb. And then, of course, we have our goals moving forward. So just wanted to give you some information on where we were at with that. Yes.
Am I correct? You have fixed costs on the pharmacy, and if you could do more volume, there would be commensurate revenue.
Correct. We're, from a financial perspective, you'll see that we've had a 45% growth. From a utilization perspective, we are currently around 34-35% of our own providers, patients, getting their prescriptions from our pharmacy. So the more capacity we have at our own pharmacy versus sending people to Safeways and Walmarts and everywhere else, the higher potential we have for continuing to grow that financial utilization, financial revenue. Mm-hmm.
Do you need to let patients know that this service is available, or are you already doing that?
Yeah, exactly. So we're working on better campaigns to make sure that people know we're available to them. We're working with our providers to make sure that it's part of their messaging when they're meeting with their patient on, hey, did you know we have
recording
our
in
own
progress?
It's progress. Yeah, so we have lots of objectives in place to help us continue to see that climb.
Great, thank you.
And then the second handout, the 2-page or the front side, back side, is without going to each one of the metrics, I've put a title on the graphs. And what you'll see is those are snippets from our Power BI analytics solution that we use for monitoring performance. We have about, I think we're around 17 dashboards that we look at on a continual basis. These are 4 of those dashboards. You'll see that we're monitoring our patient panel sizes. We're monitoring that pharmacy utilization. We monitor dental. So it just gives you a visual so that you can have a better understanding of how we're going to be keeping an eye on these objectives on a continuing basis. I've blacked out some of the names and things like that, but we have it down to the detail where you'll see the black line on one of the graphs. You'll notice there's a black line, and I can pull this data down to the provider level. So if there are no further questions about that, I can move into our goals. Is my voice good? Okay. Yeah. Sometimes I'm too loud, so. All right, so for our 2040 Thriving Communities Initiative, we worked closely with Sean McGuire on these goals. And our first goal is to help the communities with their resiliency with your resiliency priority and continuing to try to help reduce the greenhouse gas emissions through the next 2 years. This has a lot to do with our teleworking policies that are in place and through watching some of the impact that we've had over the past few years as we did have the ramifications of COVID and seeing our greenhouse gases dramatically decrease. So we're wanting to continue on that and progress. Sean is helping us keep track of that to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. We have some job descriptions that we're looking at to, excuse me, to look at those to see if we have some positions that would be permanent telework that would help us. And then also with our organizational structure, we're working better to have less commutes for our staff as they go from clinic to clinic. The cost value focus area is environmental and natural resources. That's fine. It's okay. And we're not asking for any additional funding for this. The second goal is to develop, approve, and implement an updated emergency preparedness plans that address both employee and patient safety and security at all 6 of our community health center sites by the end of this year. With that goal, we'd also like to have 100% of our staff trained on specific safety and security plans by the end of the biennium. The cost value focus area is emergency preparedness. Commissioner priority is community resilience. And again, this will be funded through current service level. We have a small bit of our budget is on training. We also are working with the county on training specific to safety, like situational awareness training that was just made available later this last month. So we're continuing to leverage what trainings are already available there. We have emergency plans in place, but they're very dusty. And so this is an opportunity for us to dust those off and pay better attention to our current surroundings and current safety concerns and to get those to be more effective. And then our last goal is to develop an extensive community health center promotions and engagement plan and begin implementing actions by October 1st, 2023. We'd also included in that like to focus more on our new website and have a full new design to reach communities in need of access by June 30th, 2024. Our core values for focus area for this is community safety. Commissioner priority is community resiliency. And again, this is already in our current, this is funded through our current service level. We've obviously gotten to have the same opportunities that a lot of other departments have had with IT moving to a new web platform. We just need to take that that new opportunity and put resources into working on that. We need updated photographs. We need updated content. So we really need to focus more on our face and our promotion strategy across the board. That's all also very critical to making sure that we have access available to those that need to come and see us. And so we're currently already underway in building that promotion strategy. So thank you. We passed through this because we talked about policy packages last time, not to just jump past things. So the future challenges and opportunities that I thought you should all be aware of that we're really paying mind to, and then also leveraging as much as we can is one is our challenges are going to be Medicaid redeterminations. I think that most of you are aware that through the public health emergency, that the continuing coverage policy and process was on hold with Oregon Health Authority, meaning that anyone who had applied and gotten insurance through Medicaid, they stopped doing the annual reviews and having people submit their updated financial information in order to determine continuous coverage of Medicaid benefits. With the public health emergency ending on May 11th, What that means is that the state is going to implement the review again of making sure that people are still eligible for benefits. And they're estimating about 90 to 300,000 recipients will be losing coverage across the entire state. That's not just our area. It's just that that's the entire state. But OHA is doing a really good job in being very systematic in their strategy in how they're going to be reviewing for eligibility, starting with those that are most likely to continue eligibility, and then getting further down the line over the next 12 to 14 months into some of those clients who may go over the federal poverty limit. And so we're working we've got all hands on deck with our navigation team. We have signage up. It's very brief signage, like check your mail, talk to us if you need help, fill out your forms. So we're doing a lot of work in the community and in our community health center specifically to make sure that if people get those packets that they fill them out and get that determined. And then if they are determined not to be eligible for Medicaid any longer, we also have staff that work to go through Cover Oregon and see if there's other benefits and insurance that clients might be able to be eligible for. The other one is workforce shortages. That's a national problem. I've been to a few gatherings with other community health center leaders over the last few months. And it's one of the number one topics that we're all discussing is workforce challenges and how do we develop pipelines to make sure that we're not feeling the pains of this turnover. One of the reasons our current service level is not as pretty as we would like it to be is that we've spent a lot of money on locums. And I think I talked a little bit about that last time. Those are temporary providers to fill positions so that we can continue providing care. So we're moving out of that. We have 3 new primary care providers that have approached us. So should be onboarding those providers as early as August 1st. And that'll substantially help where we're at financially. And then we're looking at some trainee programs whereby we have received some grant funding through school-based health centers to continue our MA training program, a medical assistant training program, where we can onboard someone, pay someone while they're doing their schooling. And then once they get their certification, they stay with us for at least a year to 2 years, depending on what we put in that contract. So we're working on developing new ways and pipelines to keep the workforce plentiful. Those are our biggest 2 challenges. Our opportunities. Well, before I go to opportunities, just want to pause to make sure there aren't any questions about that.
No question.
Great, thank you. Opportunities, the more favorable topic. So there's quite a bit of opportunity out there. Capital funding. So as you know, we've working with our contracted lobbyist team, CFM, and we do have a request for $1 million for a new Monroe Health Center replacement in the Monroe community. Right now, we have a pretty, what I would call end-of-life modular unit out there where we can host 1 primary care provider. And we know there's a demand for more. And so we've requested some funds and we have some matching funds from HRSA to try to see if we can get a new federally funded modular out there that would be expanded up to close to around 4,000 square feet. And right now we're practicing in probably 1,400 to 1,600 square feet. And we've got a lot of support and buy-in from the superintendent, the principals of the district to continue that school-based health center in that location in Monroe. With that brings the opportunity to expand and promote and try to attract another primary care provider and to have some other ancillary services out there like dental and behavioral health and things like that for that community. Our next opportunity is there's a lot of funding right now available through the school-based health center program. We have submitted a grant for $250,000 to allow for some more payment for current services that were already provided but not funded by school-based health centers to do. We've been continuing to be open and available for 40 hours a week at our school-based health centers, and our current funding supports about 10 hours a week. So this funding would help fill that gap and help us to make sure that we have enough revenue to cover the costs that we're and services we're providing to the community, as well as do some expanded services around dental. The other opportunity, and this one is pretty fresh for me, it's kind of new, and we've had some other community health centers reach out to us to see if we would like to join what they're calling an ACO network. An ACO is an accountable care organization. And basically what it is you take more than one player, more than one. So ACOs could be like a hospital who's connected with primary care providers and also their CCO to provide some more coordinated effort for patient care. This proposal is an ACO network with community health centers across Oregon to begin a partnership and create an ACO partnership as a CHC. And basically there's really only an opportunity to gain funding through the Medicare Shared Savings. So this would be working with Medicare, with our Medicare population to help cost sustainability and also quality. So you're paid more from Medicare if you're able to show a reduction in costs and an increase in quality services. So like I said, that's pretty fresh. I've been on a lot of meetings with some other CHCs, seeing where we're at. But I do think it is a potential opportunity. And then we have a mobile health unit funding. So we have OHA has reached out to us, the Oregon Health Authority, for a mobile clinic opportunity. And so we've submitted a grant. It's a 5-year grant. We've submitted a grant in the amount of a little over $1 million. It's $1.275 million. Because what OHA is trying to do is promote mobile clinics so that we can get out there and reach the community that isn't able to have a lot of access to services in their area. So with that, this would cover the cost of the mobile clinic, whether we decide to lease it, meaning a mobile clinic is like a van. So it would be like a van that looked like a clinic, and you could provide services in the clinic. So this would allow for funding to build the van and either lease the van or purchase the van. We still would need to determine what would be best for us, and then FTE support for the van over the course of the 5 years. And then last, I talked already about this is our MA trainee program and our medical residency program. So this is our internal program where we precept and train both medical assistants and primary care providers. So there is an opportunity. We've been working with Samaritan over a few years now, but we're finally pushing it a little bit further in getting Samaritan to be our sponsoring agency for a graduate medical education program where we actually bring own residents and help them to get their degree in public health and prevention services. So we have a partnership with OSU, with Samaritan, and that's additional funding from Medicare and from HRSA to be able to do that program and to have additional payments to those providers who are precepting these residents. With residents, we would have the ability to have more billable encounters. And also we would receive additional funding from Medicare and HRSA to pay both the learner and the primary care practitioner working with us. So those are, I think, what our biggest opportunities are over the next 2 years and challenges. And I think that concludes the presentation for the community health centers.
Thank you, Carla. Questions?
y-
Commissioner Malone, then Commissioner Lajoie.
Yep, I have a couple on mobile health. Van, what kind of, would that be Benton County only, or would it have a more of a regional range?
Yeah, we would be looking at both Benton and Lynn County. I think there's opportunity to partner with Lincoln too, if they wanted to, but at this point, our community health centers are only sponsored through HRSA to be in Lynn County and Benton County.
Okay, and it reminds me of the library's bookmobile and going out to the different parts of, in this case, Benton County, but I think that may be a good model to follow. Other question, you mentioned grants a couple times. Just how does that work in your department? Do you have somebody that spends a fair amount of time looking and monitoring, or I'm just curious, kind of in general, how the grant efforts work.
Yeah, well, in the effort of saving costs, we do not have someone specifically identified as a grants coordinator. We are starting to work with Sharisa more and using Munis to track grants. And I think that there's probably more opportunity to partner with the finance team with Sharisa's help. At this time, we have, so most of you know, Patricia Conklin. So Patricia Conklin in her role with the community health centers is a lot of assistance with myself and the board and HRSA. And so she keeps an eye on grant opportunities through HRSA. And then our health navigation program manager, the health navigation program was born out of grants and continues to be survived by grants. And so that's just a part of their responsibility in general, is to constantly be looking for grant opportunities. And then lastly, all of our management team, we have Becky Fisher, who manages our some of our clinics, but she also manages our school-based health program, has a very strong connection with the folks in Oregon for the school-based health center program, and is constantly staying apprised of grants. So it's a concerted effort. And then we usually, if there's a grant opportunity we determine is appropriate to pursue with my approval, then it usually takes a team of us getting together and pulling all of our resources, including Ahmed, before the financial components.
Commissioner, in terms of using CFM, as you know, with our federal contract, we also have them as a grant writer as well. So they helped Carla on the Monroe Health Center application. And then as we have more federal opportunities, they're also reviewing those, and we'll be working with Carla to actually provide that assistance to write the grant. They would be the subject matter expert.
Right. Thanks for reminding me of that part of their service for us.
Yeah, and thanks, Rick. I forgot about that. We've actually worked with them twice now in helping assist with some grants.
Great, thank you.
I too have a question about the mobile van, but mine's a little bit more about the cost benefit of investing in that capacity. Whether we can really get, again, number of encounters up enough to make it pay for itself without subsidy, and wondering how duplicative it is of the Samaritan mobile health van. And then I also have another question. Didn't we also acquire a van through public health? And what is that being used for now? Is it being used now?
So I can answer some of that, but not all of that. Part of the reason why we decided to go for the grant funding is exactly that. The cost so far, the amount of money that HRSA had given us through ARPA and through some of those COVID funds didn't make sense, because it was kind of that one-time funding, and it would help us to get the van, right? But it didn't help us to continue paying for the van. I think what we have here is an opportunity to have all of the upfront costs paid for, plus some of the grant funding to support the FTEs. And then, yes, you're right. We're going to have to do a cost benefit analysis on sustainability if we decided to do a lease agreement and move forward with an entity that comes out and does all the maintenance, or if we purchase it and have fleet costs. So we have not I don't think we're far enough down the line right now. It was just the first application. And then I think we'll have to review after the 5 years to see if it still makes sense. And for that, I mean, I think the safest bet would be to go through a lease agreement. Because that way, if we're done leasing it, we're done leasing it. We've realized that we can't sustain this any longer. With Samaritan, I don't know exactly what Samaritan's using their van for, and maybe Suzanne does, but I know they used it a lot for like vaccines and things like that. We're really partnering with other community partners around the areas. So we already partner with COI, where they provide the primary care provider who already goes out, but not with a van, to other sites like in Philomath. They'll go to Philomath and they'll spend a day in Philomath at the Corvallis Clinic, where they've been able to have a room and provide services where people have to come to them still. So this is an opportunity for us to partner with people like COI and get out into the farms. I don't think that Samaritans, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure that they're in the farms providing prevention and providing access to additional services. We have the opportunity to host dental clinics. We have the opportunity to host wellness clinics. We have the opportunity to be out there for acute needs. So I think the types of services that we're wanting to provide have more to do with equity and meeting people where they're at, instead of making them come into the clinics, than with vaccination clinic type of work.
So it's primarily to serve the migrant community, but also, I would assume there'd be a broader market. I just am still struggling with the business side of the model.
Yeah, I can, after this, Commissioner Ojero, I can get you the details on the application. I know that we did work with Ahmed. I was not involved in writing it, but I have it available. So you can see what we've done insofar as a pro forma. And then the other thing that I wanted to say, I think there's a lot more opportunity than just the migrant community. I think there's opportunity at schools. So right now we service the whole 503J district, and but only at one site where you have to come to Lincoln Elementary. This would allow us to do sports physicals, annual wellness, and partner with the community to provide services at all the schools. Lynn County is really excited about opportunities to partner with us to get access to a lot of the rural communities that don't have access to care. And so it's larger than the migrant agricultural work.
Okay. I have other bigger picture questions, but I want to make sure that, so before we leave the community health centers, I'm just going back to the projected deficit for the end of this fiscal year. Astounding figure of 4.7 million. And then thinking about that's on slide or on page 41. And then thinking about into the next year and all the work that needs to be done to get out of the hole. So what happens if we don't? That is a general fund hit. And I'm just not comfortable with the aspirational approach to services, and then not having a backup plan for how we're going to address that without that huge general fund hit when we've got a lot of other priorities at the same time.
That's a pretty loaded question. I think it's a really good concern. I would say that I think that what we've done so far is we've done our best to make cuts where we can, where it doesn't impact people. But I think that what we'll have to do is start having those harder conversations at what programs we can still sustain where they're not driving revenue. One of the ones we've been looking at currently is our reproductive health program, which is much like this rest of the state of Oregon, and pulling out of that program because there's not funding. And it's a huge cost to us, and we don't get a lot of money to cover those costs. And then we have to look at things like Alsea Health Center, where we're opening, we're hosting a facility out there. And we used to be able to subsidize it through other programs, and we don't have those subsidies any longer. So we start having to have the hard conversations. We have to look at our navigation program. So we have to start looking at the extras that we've been able to add on over the years with increased funding to see if they're still sustainable. That might mean getting right back to why we're a community health center, which is providing primary care to the underserved, and possibly not being able to have as robust of a care team as we have. I think we also have to start having a broader conversation about, who we are, what's our identity as a community health center in Benton County. Benton County is the recipient of the Ward E of the grant funds from HRSA to be a community health center. And so I think then it becomes a commissioner discussion on how important the community health centers are to this county and whether or not the general fund wants to subsidize more like they did previously. I realized in history there was more subsidizing the community health centers than there has been over the years, with the goal being that they sustain themselves without any general fund. And I think that we were heading in a good direction pre Lincoln Health Center build and pre-COVID. But we are obviously seeing that there's a lot more opportunity and we need to build our reserves back up.
I understand. And I'm just not gonna, I can't be gentle because I've been watching this over time. I know that some of the reserves were because of the way that the in-scope behavioral health services were treated, and that those funds, this additional incremental funds went into reserve rather than to providing additional behavioral health services. And that we can't do that either. So we have to look at other ways of operating. I did have a conversation with Eve Gray from Lane County when I was in Salem the other day. She's their health services administrator, and she indicated that their community health center actually is a net revenue generator, that they brought in $1.5 million last year, and that's equal to the amount that we subsidize the community health center here. So I know that I know it can be done. But we definitely need to do something differently. And I'm just struggling with the right phasing with how to figure out how much support to provide now in order to get to that model of sustainability without cutting services from some of the people that really need it.
I am also doing the same thing and trying to figure out how we get back up there. I know that I also work with Janet Reddy from Lane County quite closely. She's their new CHC director. And she also is made me feel a little bit better about our situation with billable encounters because she's stepping into the same problem. So she is working on trying to change and climb out of that average of 7 encounters per day per provider, where we need to be up to 18. So they're a great resource to talk to and to bounce ideas off of and how we move in the right direction.
Commissioner Ogerow, if I might just respond real quickly, I think, your point's well taken, though. I mean, we obviously have a very aggressive plan. I think, as I've said before, I think all of the right ideas and thoughts in terms of getting us back to or getting to a more higher productivity level will result in more revenues. But I think we always have to think about what if and being prepared. And I think Carla is absolutely right. We need to look at all those various businesses, because if you go through all of those, be it dental, be it navigation, be it reproductive health, those all are not self-sustaining. So we will have to look at those particular areas and find out, are there things that we don't do anymore? That's ultimately how you would get to that outside of looking to the general fund to subsidize.
And Personally, I would like to see numbers about just the degree to which those programs are losing money and the vulnerable folks that those particular communities, I mean, programs serve, so that I, as a policymaker, can make those decisions based on real data about where I want to invest those general fund dollars in order to support those the money losing programs. And I don't feel like I have that right now. So I'm looking forward to more clarity.
I would be glad to share some of those trends.
Commissioner White.
Thank you. I just want to, I guess, clarify that. So some, the budget questions, that's for this budget committee. Sounds like there's a lot of other policy questions and decisions that are going to rise to the board of commissioner levels, which is separate from this body right now. So sounds like we'll have to have future discussions on that. And I just wanted to say thank you for coming and sitting in the hot seat. We know that it's not your fault, you're not responsible for, the whole setup and all of this. So thank you for coming and sitting in the hot seat and taking the heat.
Thank you. I wanted to also say that this isn't the first time that the community health centers have been in this situation. I did look back over history, and it looks like we were having the same conversations way prior to me being here through the PERS crisis, where the community health centers were in a similar situation, and we were able to get back up to over 100 days reserve. So I just wanted to just add that it's not that this has never been done before.
Anything else?
Sorry, go ahead, Rick.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add one technical thing for the committee so that we have for the record. So as we went through the process of the community health center budget, obviously there was a lot of work that both Carla, myself, and a variety of staff put into it. There was an oversight. She mentioned in her opportunities here that the $1 million from the Monroe Health replacement, that is a federal request. But she also mentioned a HRSA grant that is currently capital grant that we got last biennium. We failed to roll that over into the budget recommendation that you have. So that's about $675,000 that we would like to ask when we go into deliberations that we add back to the budget. That will again serve as the matching component if we are successful in the 1 million. If we're not, then Carla will put another plan together. So again, it's not an increase in terms of revenues for operations, but it's a capital grant that we just did not put in. So I just want to put that on the record so that when we go into deliberations.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add that if you like banana muffins, I brought banana muffins. There's plain and then there's apple, blueberry, banana. So
I might need wood.
everybody help yourself.
No more? Right. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
Here, I'll invite Adam to come up and join me for information technology. Lindsay is in the process. We just had to flip between presentations here. So just giving her a quick pause so that we can get the right presentation set up.
And while we're doing that, do we know what the buzzing is? John, no?
Might be the hot.
Yes.
John.
Yeah, I don't hear the buzzing anymore. Can you hear me?
No.
Nope. Oh. Is that better? Okay. Thank you for eliminating that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, you're ready for me to,
John, we were wondering if the speaker is actually giving us it seems like there's a lot of feedback. Yeah, maybe it'd be better to just make it go away again and you'll just ask Rick to yell.
okay, Mr. Chairman, we're going to go ahead and get started with our regular part of the agenda, information technology, and their team is here today. This is, I think, as I mentioned, when Human Resources spoke a few sessions back, this is today you'll hear from IT as well as financial services. These represent our internal service funds like Human Resources. So again, just as a reminder, all the budgets that you've been hearing, they have cost associated with it for central cost allocation. Those funds find their way into internal service fund, and that's where we ultimately spend the dollars. So again, just wanted to ground you in terms of what we're going to be speaking to. So you're going to hear a lot about that until we get into the non-departmental. So just a quick overview of information technology. This is a current service level budget right now of $12 million. That's about 23% above the adopted level for 21-23. They are also as a recommendations for additional $314,000 increase to their current service level. That's a net 1 FTE addition, along with some other things that we'll speak about later. There is a vacancy factor, as with everyone applied. 6.2% is what IT came out for the 6-year trend. And as I've said before, that's your 5 to 6%. It's about average of what you typically see. So I'm comfortable with it as it relates to that particular forecast. As always, with the current service level budget drivers, they, like everyone else, personal service costs, the increase of management, salary cost, union represented increases. So those are all standard, nothing different as it relates to the IT area. As I already said, the total budget growth is in relation to 1 FTE that they'll be asking for, which is actually a limited duration position we have in place now. So this will be a continuation. They also are looking for increase in capacity to monitor, track, and remediate some of the security threats, which I think we all are very aware as we read through the newspapers, how important that is. And Adam and his team are doing a great job of really trying to put that in place. I think in addition, you'll hear from Adam about increasing maintenance cost for software. It's more expensive, just is. And that is something that is also a driver. And then one of his policy package, you'll hear about a data lake. And advancing that, which I know has been a discussion for some time. And I know I'm extremely excited in relation to some of those opportunities and how we can better manipulate data and provide better reports to everyone. The increase that you see in capital outlay as it relates to, that's the largest number that you see there at 103%. Bottom line is that's just associated with higher costs for replacement schedules. So one of the things, again, Adam will talk about is that he manages a replacement schedule for all IT equipment. And that periodically has to be increased to be able to match in terms of the needs. And as we grow as a county, as we have new facilities, as we have more people, there are more replacement costs. And that's obviously something Adam and his team has to address. Materials and supply growth, again, I already mentioned there's the standard inflation, but the increases that you see there for Adam is again really driven by a lot of the maintenance agreements that we've seen. So while the 23% is a little higher on the current service level, it's not surprising in relation to both the replacement schedules as well as some of the increases that we have seen in our software agreements. So categorically, so the personal services is at 45%. That's slightly lower, but again, doing the math, when you have much more increases in replacement cost and some higher cost in your contracting, that is the reason that is down a little bit. 19 FTE is what we're talking about for the current service level for information technology, plus they're adding the 1, as I already mentioned. So a total 20 is what they would be in. So, for what they do, that's pretty amazing in terms of the staff number. The large increase of categorical expense in relations to material and supply, I'd already mentioned, related to equipment and maintenance agreements. And then the decrease in transfers, if again, you're kind of looking at why is it the transfers are moving down, that's mostly just inter transfers that we have within funds. So it's a little bit of a technical thing. Just don't want you to worry about it. As it relates to revenue sources, as I mentioned, we're in the world of internal service funds now. So you're going to see, particularly in the next two presentations, the management service fund is the largest dedicated resource. This is where again, I mentioned cost allocation earlier. All the county departments are paying for the cost of IT management operations, the staffing that Adam has in place, along with all of the various materials and supplies, and contracting is also included there. The use and security of telecommunications and collaboration technologies is also, for our mobile devices, is another cost associated with that. So again, a lot of various costs that it comes out of that management services fund through central cost allocation. And then we have the intergovernmental fund, which is again, another element of collecting cost from various departments, but this is where a lot of our replacement and maintenance, again, everybody's on different types of schedules in relation to replacing and maintaining some of the things related to the servers, our information devices, copiers, all of the various equipment. So that's where all of that particular revenue is housed. And then they do have a small portion, a 7% general fund that is supporting the GIS. And those are dedicated dollars. Those are not discretionary, to make sure that we distinguish. Those are dollars through service charges that are received. So that's a relatively small piece. And again, know Adam will cover that in his comments in terms of the overview. So just again, to kind of kick this off for Adam, you can see the functional areas, his operations and innovations as a current service level is about 18%. That's sort of the core area as it relates to their operations. Proposed increase to 23%. Again, that's driven by some policy package investments that you will see later. Equipment replacement, as I already said, that's your bigger increase, 42%. Again, driven a lot by cost, as well as just more people and more need. Communication systems management, again, that's relatively small, 23%. When I see a small area, it doesn't take much in terms of making those changes. But again, those are around our mobile devices and some of the operational things and elements that Adam and his team manages. And then lastly is the GIS. As you can see, that's about an 8% increase. So that's where your 23 and 26% increases come from. And with that, I'll let Adam jump into the detail of each of those areas.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about IT and what we do. I brought a couple of my employees with me. This is Linda McGurl, the director of the service desk, and John Larson, who manages the innovation side of IT. I wanted to bring them along in case you guys had questions for their specific areas. But they are extremely important to our team. Within the last 6 years, IT has grown, I want to say, by about 4 positions. In the process of our growth, we've divided our department into different functional areas to better support the county as a whole. As Rick mentioned, we support the entire county, every technological need. So if something plugs into a wall or a computer, or you access it on the internet or in the cloud, we are there to support our businesses when within the county accessing and managing those systems. As Rick mentioned, our budget is sort of divided into 4 sections. Operations and innovation is going to cover all of our staff. Equipment replacement has been a big topic so far because of its expense, but that's ranges from every device that we support, about 3,000 different devices, from computers to copiers to the equipment you see in this room. We essentially bring back money from the departments to manage the replacement of those devices on a schedule. Our communication system management reflects on our infrastructure. So IT manages the infrastructure for the entire county. That's networks, servers and data centers, and all the equipment that entails. And then our GIS systems We're happy to say that we have hired a new GIS coordinator. He started with us in February. He works under John Larson in the innovation side of IT. We're looking to grow the use of GIS systems throughout the county. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. So I'm not going to read through this like a script, but we do a lot in IT for the departments that we support. When I talk to people outside of the county that don't necessarily understand local government, I tell them it's like we're supporting 14 or 15 different businesses as one IT group. As Rick mentioned, there's 19 of us, which isn't a lot for the size of the organization that we support. But we've been very careful over the years to make sure that we're not bringing on more resources than we need. We've been very careful to try and maintain the systems we have as efficiently as possible and get the most out of the services and systems that we subscribe to. But as you can see, if there's any questions about any of those, please let me know. But you know, a lot of the exciting things that you've heard other departments throughout the last couple of weeks talk about, even just recently, Carlo talking about the mobile vans and opening a new clinic in Monroe. We support all of those kinds of projects. So it's always a challenge, but any questions on those before we move on? Here you can see our organizational chart. As I mentioned, we are 19 positions and adding a 20th, which the 20th has actually been a limited duration position added throughout the middle of last biennium. We added that position to address some pressures we were seeing on our service desk. So we have 4 individuals dedicated to the service desk. That is a help desk or a call center, or you know, I'm sure you've heard of it by other terms, but that's our front line. Those are the individuals that when people call IT, that's who they talk to. One of the issues that we had seen over the past several years is a growth in the amount of requests that we respond to. And so adding that position allowed us to identify one position as a dispatcher role that can then divvy the work out to the other 4 individuals. So our request is to maintain that position, put it into permanent full-time so that we can continue to strategize how we manage the increased growth that we've seen. So operations and innovation, this is the first of those 4 functions in our budget I talked about. This is where the rubber meets the road. In general, costs across the board for information technology services and devices have grown. We've struggled with, like other departments, in hiring and retention. The unemployment rate in Oregon is low, but if you look at the unemployment rate for IT professionals, it's extremely low in Oregon. So finding those resources has been a struggle. I would say probably the majority of the people that we have hired over the past several years have come from out of state. So I talked about the 1 FTE that we're hoping to add. Also, just a note, over the past biennium, we completed a large project to help move various departments into this building, including ourselves. But the benefit of that was we were able to consolidate operations. So prior to moving into the Calapooya building, IT was strung out about 2 or 3 different buildings across town. A lot of our work was divided. We had to send people to other buildings to work on loading computers, for example, while maintaining and other staff on site to help with managing service requests. So moving here has been a game changer for us. Things are much more efficient. We're able to stand up our training center again and provide training for staff. So it's been a really great change for us to move into the Calapooya building. So equipment replacement, this is a large part of what IT does for the rest of the county. Our strategy for the past probably decade has been to shift from a reactive state in terms of replacing equipment to a planned replacement strategy. So we invest in sinking funds, gather dollars to put replacement that's expensive on a replacement schedule that'll make sure that it doesn't become a problem. So in a reactive world, you wouldn't address something until it broke. Well, that's a lot of wasted time and very inefficient. Our strategy is to replace that equipment before it breaks, near the end of its life cycle. So it's a balancing act to determine how much we can get out of that resource before it should have to be replaced. So we have different schedules for all types of different equipment. Some are 4 years, some are up to 8 or 10 years. Some of our fiber optic lines are 25 years. So different schedules for different pieces of hardware. A couple things I wanted to point out, as Rick alluded to, the cost of replacements can be lumpy, is a technical term. So what that means is based on when the devices were purchased and its planned replacement date, some bienniums are more expensive than others because we have more replacements to do in that given biennium. That makes sense. Also, some of the things that have contributed to that lumpiness have been a large influx of new devices from when we had to adapt to COVID and remote work. And also more recently, upgrading our devices to better adapt to some more newer technologies that they're needing to run. All right, communication systems management. I referred to this as to the fund that kind of pays for our infrastructure. So more basically, internet services, our wide area network, mobile devices, our voice system, meaning telephone system. And all of those are typically paid subscription services, just like you would pay for at your house, just a lot more expensive on a commercial level. A couple of influences here that we're looking at is expanding our internet services to account for our data lake development. And that requires some dedicated bandwidth in order to support. Also, we anticipate that mobile devices, right now, I think we have roughly 350 devices. We expect that number to increase for employees across the county, just as it has the last few several biennium. But in particular, this biennium, we expected to increase because of the adaptation to multi-factor authentication, which is a security measure we're implementing that will require people to may require people to use a mobile device to authenticate and log into their systems. One other major impression here is our voice systems contract to manage our phone system expired mid-biennium. That was a 10-year contract at the current rate. So the support for that system increased markedly under the new contract because they were using labor rates from 2010. All right, we talked about graphic information systems, or GIS. So this particular fund does have a revenue source, and that's from document fees. Generally, this fund outperforms estimated revenues, and we do that as a conservative estimate to make sure that the fund is healthy. We, as I mentioned, have hired a new GIS coordinator. So some of the increase in what we're asking for in this fund is to accommodate training for that position. And also mid-biennium, we have a GIS committee, a steering committee that determines how some of the funding for GIS efforts is spent. And part of what they determined was for the following biennium, they would like to invest in more licensing and actually change to an enterprise licensing model to provide software more broadly across the county. We have several positions in other departments acting as GIS analysts for various reasons, various roles in the public services we provide, and moving to an enterprise model allows us to provide those tools more readily to those individuals. Sorry, oh, that's okay. No problem. So we're about to get into goals, but I just want to pause and ask if there are any questions so far. Yeah, Zan.
I have a question about the telephones.
Yes.
And the fact that that has become more expensive. Personally, I have used my desk-based telephone maybe less than a dozen times in the last couple of years.
Mhm.
And is that technology going to go away? Is that something that we can eventually shift away from, or a cost we can eliminate, or?
That's a great question, Commissioner. So what you're personally experiencing is validated in that most people, when they come to the office in a standard business environment, aren't typically using their desk phones much anymore. We have other technologies that have shifted that communication away. But if you look at it from the perspective of a business, many of our departments need a telephone system to make their business run. So calling trees, voicemails, various ways to route calls, all those kinds of things are all built into that kind of voice system. And it's really difficult to shift that kind of service away to a different technology. So it is something that we have on our minds. One of the things that we're looking at potentially doing is cutting some of that system out and migrating standard voice systems. So just dial tone to dial a call outside the county into our Teams system. So we haven't done a cost benefit analysis yet to determine whether or not it makes any sense. If we're also still having to support phone system to do some of those traditional things like I talked to you about. But it is something we're looking into, and the future, generally speaking, is moving away from traditional phone systems.
Thank you.
Commissioner Malone.
Yeah, to the security question, and you mentioned MFA, and I guess could you speak generally about where in the budget some of the security features might be found?
Sure. So a couple of in our standard software agreements is where most of the funding for multi-factor authentication and addressing security will come from. So we have a lot of different software that supports how we manage security. Multi-factor authentication is just the newest one. So through our software agreements, we would fund licensing for multi-factor authentication. But as you alluded to, that's not the only source of cost related to security and supporting multi-factor authentication. Some of it is going to be hardware devices and improving laptops and computers to allow the functionality of those systems. Also built into our budget requests is to ask for a security operations center as a service. So we're looking to reach outside to gain assistance with managing security updates and alerts with services provided by a private company.
Great. I appreciate that. It's just such a concern. I mean, we're vulnerable. Apparently we're a juicy target, and appreciate the efforts to keep us secure. You mentioned fiber having a limited life, like everything else. I know in the last CIP, and I think I saw something that we're moving on it, but the fiber from either Sunset or here to the fairgrounds, is that project moving?
It is, Commissioner. Yeah, I think this week the RFP posts. We know that we have respondents to that RFP in hand that are going to meet our criteria. The goal is to have that construction done by the end of the summer. So Commissioner Malone is referring to is a fiber build that will connect the Calapooya building to our fair administration building. The benefit, aside from just having a second leg to connect this building to our network, is that it's going to create another circuit that will allow us to build a ring throughout the city of Corvallis for all of our infrastructure. And the idea behind that is once we have a ring in place, we can reconfigure our network so that if a particular leg of our network goes down, the traffic that would carry all of our vital business information would fall back on itself and use the other leg outside of that building to reconnect to the network automatically. So while we were in construction in this building, we had a fiber optic connection built out from the Sunset Building to here. That just after the Board of Commissioners moved into this building, that line was cut by the construction company. It was a very unfortunate incident. But having the fiber ring in place, having that other leg out to the Fair Administration Building would have meant that business continued as normal until we had the other leg repaired. So that's a long-term goal. Building out this leg from the Calapooia Building to the Fair Building gets us a step closer. I hope that fills in everybody else on what that's about. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
And just, this is more for Rick, we just mechanically, that money was in the current CIP budget for this biennium, and it sounds like it might not quite be done. Is that just a carryover?
Commissioner Malone, you will hear in the non-departmental presentation when we get to that, this was the ring topology. I think that's the classification of it, was moved into our ARPA funds.
Oh,
And
that's
so, yes, that will be a carryover and you'll see it when I get to the non-departmental.
great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
More questions? Commissioner Hyder?
Yes.
Sorry, it's early for me still. Is that causing the increase in the need for phones, for cell phones? Okay, because at my work, I have that as well, right?
Sure.
Where it says, is this really you? And I slide my little thing up on my cell phone. So are we literally providing cell phones for employees in order for them to be able to authenticate themselves on their computers?
So our approach to implementing multi-factor authentication was to provide many options. One of those options will be to authenticate using a county phone. It will not be required. So if a person doesn't already have a phone, they're going to make a business decision. Do we purchase a phone just to make authentication easy? Maybe they're a mobile worker and it makes a lot of sense to do that anyway. So that's why we do feel like there's probably going to be an increase in adaptation of wireless devices just for MFA, but it's not a project requirement. So we'll address MFA other ways for people that don't have a county device. We can extend the option to authenticate over a phone to a personal device that's not provided by the county. We have other devices. I don't know how familiar you guys are with them, but we can use physical keys. We can use biometrics with a camera or a fingerprint. So our approach to the project is really to provide a lot of options, not just because we're gracious, but because for us, it means that we have a lot of ways to adapt to the different business uses that we have across the county.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
More questions? No. Continue.
All right. So we're on to county goals. We were just talking about mobile devices. One of the pressures and increase in customer service that we'd like for county employees is how we manage our mobile device deployments. Currently, any device that we purchase through our mobile device providers, which is typically Verizon or AT&T, the device comes to county IT, we handle it. Actually, more than one person handles it. We schedule an appointment for an employee to come in. We then sit with them and help them get through setting it up. It's a lot of time to coordinate for a simple mobile device. What we're looking to do with this goal is to streamline that process. The ideal situation would be that the providers send the device directly to the employee steps through some basic processes to get it set up, and they don't even have to come into IT. So that's the idea behind this goal. We also hope to better address how we manage recycling of old devices. Like I mentioned earlier, we have hundreds of these throughout the county with different employees. They age out just like computers. Also, there's a lot of turnover between employees. The device doesn't necessarily get handed from one employee to the other. So the other aspect of this goal is to better manage the fleet of devices and manage how they're recycled. One side benefit of providing on-site recycling for these kind of devices is that employees can bring their other electronic devices they might want to recycle to those bins. And we're going to arrange for getting those into recycling as well. Let's see, our second goal is about our web redesign project. I'm sure you've heard of this from several departments over the last couple of weeks. John Larson, this is his baby. If you've ever been part of a web redesign project for any organization or business, it's a large undertaking. It's essentially a rebrand for the face of the organization. As part of this project, we wanted to migrate to a new domain, it was bentoncountyor.gov. We've implemented that for our email services, but the new website will also launch on that domain. The idea behind this goal is to get our new website published by the end of the year. And another main attribute of this goal is to address accessibility guidelines. So some of the limitations of our current website have been addressing the accessibility needs of our constituents.
And just a side note, for Adam, similar to the ring topology project, you will also see this one in ARPA. This is another project that we funded within the CIP process, but it was part of ARPA as well. So it will be a carryover as well.
And so before we move on, just to provide you a little more background of what we intend to do with our new website, this is going to be several steps forward from what we're currently providing in terms of a website. If you've interacted with other modern websites for government services, you've probably encountered the ability to purchase a permit online or to look up a policy easily. Those are just a couple of goals of our new web project. It's really to provide e-government services as a single point of entry. People will be able to set up a public profile for themselves, track things that they have going on or in process with the county, better look up policy information. So really looking to completely innovate what we're doing right now with our public website. So it's a aspirational goal, but John has the resources to do it. So we're very excited.
How firm is the December 31st date?
John, are you leaning?
It's as firm as we can get it at this stage. So we will have the initial site ready to look at at the end of this month. So we'll be starting with training all the departments, because a lot of this is them migrating all their stuff. So we're doing the beta. Community development has agreed to be the beta. That's in addition to IT and BOC, who are kind of part of the team. So by the end of August, we should have community development, the main landing pages, the top level IT, BOC in place for the 3-month push to get everybody to get their mission critical stuff over. So then the soft launch right now is scheduled for December 18th. We don't see any obstacle outside of people meeting their own needs inside IT. We feel really good about we took our time and did the underlying architecture right. So there could be delays that come up, but right now we're smooth sailing.
That's great. I am just so excited for that. So when you launch it, we should throw a party.
I agree. I think, we've got on the schedule December 18th and as the soft launch, basically we flip over and then giving it 30 days or so. And then the end of January, we want to do a public, when whatever we can. And the other positive thing is we're already moving on to these projects. Adam has mentioned making the county code, a much more searchable, much more accessible, putting in so people can accept payments and departments can decide to get those payments and the forms, and just a lot of really fun stuff that's coming in. So super excited.
I'm chomping at the bit. So thank you.
Me too.
All right, thank you, John. Let's see, goal number 3 is to use our resources that we currently have to be a leader in training for technology to the county. That's the goal in a summary. Prior to moving to the Calapooya building several years ago, we had a training room in the Sunset building. Of course, that was separate from where we worked, so it made it difficult to host trainings there. It was actually a much smaller room. part of our footprint into moving to this building is we have a large, amazing space for providing technology training and other trainings also actually, but since it's within the footprint of IT, one of our goals this coming biennium is to provide training at regular intervals to address skilling up our workforce in technology, not only in the stuff that the software that we provide for them on their computers, but to also focus on new features. We've rolled out a new office suite within the last several months, so there's a good need there to build on what we've rolled out, what people have learned. So with the goal to provide at least 24 training sessions throughout the biennium. That's once a month, but I think we're looking at really about 2 a month is our internal goal. We've got several topics already in line ready to roll in July. As well as since we've moved in August, we've had some kind of training going on in there, whether that's been on enterprise software or the office suite rollout or whatever it might have been. So the goal really is to just use the room and the resources that we have to the best of our abilities. All right, the last goal, the past 2 years or so, IT has been working closely with our health department to build an incident reporting tool for safety issues. The idea was to provide an online tool that they could have an electronic version, paper form-driven process that the health department had been using. We started with the health department because they tend to have this issue more than most. The idea is to expand the use of that tool out to the rest of the county. There are several benefits to that, aside from just having the process made into an electronic process. We can expand the use of that tool to provide insights to the safety officer on what trends there are across the county and how we can address those through training or other means. Also, if there are legal requirements for reporting those issues outside of our organization, this tool organizes all of that and makes it much easier. All right, so a summary of our policy package requests. We mentioned the 1 FTE increase, and that's for our dispatcher. Aside from the 1 FTE, there are 5 policy packages that we're looking at adding. Just as a note, through the budget process, all 5 were recommended for approval, but one of those was very small, $45,000 for conference room technology was moved to a non-departmental budget request. And then, as Rick mentioned earlier, with a 6% recommended vacancy factor, that cuts down our increase from over 600,000 to 314,719. So in total, recommended package request summary is about 3% over last biennium. So to go over the policy package requests in more detail, our first, I think I've already beat this one to death, but let me know if you have any questions. This is about extending a limited duration position we had on our service desk to full-time. The second, which I'd like to spend a little bit of time on, is about the Security Operations Center services that I mentioned when Commissioner Malone brought up our issues with managing security. So over the past several years, we've noticed that, as most people, I guess, in culture have noticed, a significant uptick in information security related incidents, not only in local government, but just broadly across all IT departments in the world. So of all the systems we support, many of them are very common. So they're easy target, such as our Microsoft software systems, the operating systems that we choose to run on our devices. Because of that, they've become an easy target for people that just want to cause chaos or money grab. With that, 2 years ago, January 2021, IT internally began tracking these issues with what we call a security board. We've used one of our FTE, who's the systems administrator, just to manage that board. We meet on these issues weekly. And it's gotten to the point where we basically need at least one FTE just to manage keeping up with security incidents and upgrades. It used to be that we could schedule out these kinds of updates and security issues on a quarterly basis even. And we could just lump them together and manage them in a maintenance night, that kind of thing. That's completely shifted to the point where if you don't respond to one of these immediately and get them patched, you're at a major risk and majorly vulnerable. So one of the ways we looked at adapting to this new threat was to bring on an FTE dedicated to this, which is a lot of organizations do. Usually organizations that are much larger than us look at adding individuals responsible for this role. Rather than fund a full FTE though, we're asking for $280,000 to fund a contract with a security firm that does this for, as economy of scale for several organizations across the state. A couple of companies that we've talked to more recently work with Deschutes County, City of Bend, Albany, Lynn County. So they have local contacts they work with. The kinds of services they provide are not only just responding to data breaches, but it's being that canary in the mine, letting us know what to look out for, where we should be focusing our efforts to make sure that our systems remain as secure as possible. I was just gonna ask if there are any questions on that, because I know it's a sort of a new thing. All right. Data lake licensing and storage. So you guys have probably heard this term thrown around. Rick mentioned that he was very excited about this. This is a concept that in IT we've been working on for several years. One of the challenges to implementing a system like this is, again, similar to the security operations. Typically, only larger organizations take on this kind of technology. But to summarize the benefits of a data lake, we'll be aggregating all the information systems that we host in our data centers into a lake. So think of all the data that we host as the watershed. We're collecting that into a lake and creating an opportunity to draw from that lake and combine that data however we would like it in different products. Rick mentioned reports, but things like Carla's Power BI dashboards that she provided to you earlier are also some of the products that we can provide. There's also just a lot of opportunities that until those datas are combined, we don't simply have no way of doing that right now. Another benefit of a data lake is going to address the challenge that IT has had for as long as I've worked in IT. And that's taking disparate systems that are provided from different companies across the landscape and taking away the problem with trying to integrate those systems. So because you take the underlying data and bring it into a lake, you don't have to build in those integrations that are extremely time consuming and problematic. You can take the underlying data and do whatever you'd like with it. So this policy package request basically plants the seeds for us to start to build that lake. In the mid biennium last year, we hired the county's first database administrator. He has experience in building data lakes, and you'll hear a lot of terms thrown around similar to this. There's data warehouses, data marts. Those are all different functions of how the data lake is going to work for us as a county. And our database administrator has direct experience in building these from the bottom up. So we're really excited to have him on staff as a resource. And this funding is really to just let him run and start to build that lake. Some of the initial opportunities we see are with the health department, and building on what you've already seen Carla's needs are with the CHCs. Also with community development. Is with the software that they support. Like I mentioned, how it's going to be a side benefit for IT. Some of our departments are microcosms of that, where they have 5 different software utilities. They don't integrate, so they've got staff that are literally logging into each one, pulling information out and combining that information. The technology behind a data lake allows us to do that in an automated way and a lot more efficiency. Any questions on that?
I just want to say I'm very excited about it because I've been wanting this in order to put together the metrics for the Justice System Improvement Program. And it's still going to be complicated because we have to bring in the courts. We're not part of our system. But I think that being able to look at data across the whole process of someone being engaged or involved with the criminal legal system will make a huge difference in our ability to improve the system. We'll have to, also bring in behavioral health, and it won't be easy, but it's very exciting.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's another great example. John, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask if you wanted to add any other comments.
No, I think it's
Right.
good.
All right, this policy package, the data lake internet circuit I referred to earlier. So in order to address the needs to ship that data into our data centers and out, we would need a dedicated internet circuit. If we chose to move ahead with the lake without a dedicated internet circuit, it would essentially it would make our regular internet traffic very slow. We can control when, but in the end, the reason for the request is that there's just simply not enough bandwidth to support the needs of a lake combined with everything else that we're doing. As mentioned earlier, this is a small meeting room technology package that was moved into other funding. But basically the idea there was to provide equipment for small conference rooms around the county and standardize that equipment so that if an employee went from one building to another, their experience with trying to use the technology in that conference room was the same. Any questions on the policy packages? All right, so future challenges and opportunities. I kind of beat this first challenge to death, talking about our security operations center as a service. But to kind of give you some stats to back up that discussion, so there have been 340 specific security incidents that we've tracked on the security board I mentioned since January of 22. 75 of those are active. So we're actively trying to build in enough time of our day to manage those security vulnerabilities. And sometimes there just isn't enough time in the day. So we have to make hard decisions about what vulnerabilities we can stretch out, which ones are really have to be fixed now. And it's that in itself is a huge time sink compared to what our responsibilities have been in the past. Let's see, as far as other challenges, our growth in the county has been a big challenge. Our adaptation to remote work has been a big challenge for IT. There's just 20 of us. In 2022, our department as a whole managed over 10,000 service request tickets. So that's everything from I need my password reset to I need a completely different computer setup, and which takes several weeks to accommodate. That's an uptick from last biennium where we had just under 7,000 service request tickets. So you can see there's a major growth, not just in terms of how the county is asking IT to support it, but I will admit that some of this is reflected in how IT is managing following up on incidents and security service requests. So we're documenting better, in short. Let's see. So of those 10,000 service requests, 6,000 of those fell on the 4 individuals that man our service desk with that front line I mentioned earlier. So they take the lion's share of tickets and ticket resolution and they escalate those to our other teams, which is what those about other 4,000 tickets were. And 300 of those were PC replacements and deployments over the past 2 years. So we expect these numbers to continue to trend upward only because we look around and all we see is growth, which is a great thing. And so our challenge in IT is to try to make these processes more efficient, try to help departments be more efficient. A big goal of ours this last biennium was to roll out that office suite upgrade to provide a tool for, or many tools actually, to help departments be more efficient in managing their business. But that also means that there are new exciting things for people to call IT about. So. As far as opportunities, I wrote sort of a large paragraph here, but I've talked about most of it. One thing I just want to explain is that in IT, in past years, IT was just more seen as a support role. If something breaks, call IT, right? We really wanted to lead the county in innovation. So 4 years ago, when I mentioned that we bifurcated our department into innovation and operations, that was the idea. In innovations, we have our developers, our GIS coordinator, our business systems analyst, and our database administrator. All of those positions are to really look at how we can lead the county to innovate in technology. So it's a shift from just being the guys in the basement, right? So that's really our aspiration. I think we've had a lot of success with that very recently. And projects like the data lake, the office suite rollout, multi-factor authentication, those are all, developed in IT, led by IT. So we're really trying to be at the tip of the spear.
Ms. Rajwa.
I do have another question that was prompted by some of the things you've discussed. And particularly thinking about the ring topology and about the new courthouse and district attorney's office, and the potential need to move our servers out of the law enforcement building. With the shift to Benton County, Oregon.gov, we have more in the cloud, right? So are we downscaling some of those physical hard servers that we use?
I would say it's not related to our change in domain name,
Okay,
but the trend over the past several years has been to migrate some of the servers that we were traditionally hosting in our data center to cloud services. Couple of examples are our district attorney case management system, and eventually, very soon, our Munis system is going to be moved into the cloud. So those are traditionally systems that we've hosted on site. But I don't want to make that sound like we're really alleviating IT responsibility. It's a shell game.
Yeah.
Right. So we take some of the costs and time that it took to support those servers in the data center. Those get moved out to the cloud, but that puts IT in more of a support role, man in the middle, where we need to not only make sure that the cloud service provider is standing up there into the deal, but that we are really the ones close to the business that understands the needs of how that cloud service interacts with the business here at the county.
you just don't need a physical space for it anymore.
Yeah, and actually physical space throughout the years, because we addressed physical servers through virtualized technology. Our data centers between the Sunset Data Center and our downtown data center in the law enforcement building, we have about 3 or 4 racks of network and server gear. As you alluded to, with the potential move of our law enforcement systems and centers, the way that we see that happening is building in a data center platform at the new site, and then eventually over time migrating the services from downtown over to a new data center location.
Thank you. That's what I was getting at.
Sure. Any other questions?
Any more? Commissioner Malone?
Yeah, back to the fiber And thinking of the campus next to Hewlett Packard and the city isn't too far away with some of their services. Are there any possibilities for sharing of fiber or water? Any utilities that are in the Corrals Public Works area or any other possibilities for joint efforts?
Good question, Commissioner. There is. So over the decades, the county has had an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Corvallis and the school district to share fiber optic networks. So we have a mix of that throughout the city. One of those legs that you mentioned obviously connects the city's downtown needs to their public works yard, which is just a small creek jump to the site that we're talking about. We've been meeting with the city and the public works director about extending fiber optics from the public works and waste management site to the new site. It's a question of whether or not, one, there's dark fiber available for us to extend from that site to the other, and two, the age of the fiber that's been there. So if it turns out there's dark fiber available and it's healthy, then that's something we're definitely going to take advantage of. Similar conversation that's further along, just to kind of provide you what that might look like, is the crisis center that we're building downtown. We're leveraging city provided fiber that runs from the law enforcement building to the fire station, splicing some dark fiber off of that line to connect the crisis center. So it look like that, just with a longer range, but we have to verify that fiber is available and the health of the fiber. If it turns out that it's not, the backup plan is to come up with a cost to extend our own fiber lines from the current closest connection of the ring, which would be downtown, to that site, and or leverage lease services through an internet service provider. And basically the way that works is they hand it off to us with a lease agreement circuit, but they provide the infrastructure.
Thank you. Yep.
Other questions? No, thank you very much.
Hey, welcome. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Sure. 5 minutes? Okay, sure.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we are on to our last couple presentations. The first is our Financial Services Department, and I'm delighted to have Debbie Sessions here, my deputy from the Financial Services Department, as well as Ahmed Zubair down at the end. He is our Health Finance Officer and a critical component to the work that we're doing with health centers. And Ahmed is relatively new to the county and has just done a tremendous job in kind of coming in and really understanding that world, because it is much different, and to really help us, he's going to be a key person as we move forward into our work with the community health centers. And of course, you all know Debbie. She's been here for a long time, but she is a wonderful, and just so happy to have her as my partner in terms of working through the Financial Services Department. Her history is invaluable. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I'm going to play kind of two roles here today. As soon as I get my clicker to work. There we go. So I'm going to play two roles. I'm going to kind of typical the CFO, give you the overview from a department standpoint. Then I'll move more into the director level and really talk to you about our department. So I'll apologize for the shift. So first and foremost, you're going to see a relatively large budget here. As a reminder, again, the revenues that support this is internal service funds mostly. Similar to Adam, these are dollars that come in. A big share of this $47.96 million is really our employee benefits trust. That's a large component that we get through payroll charges. And then another big component of this is debt service. We manage the debt service, and as we all know, that's getting larger as we go into this next biennium. So again, just want to put that out there, is we were kind of custodian of a lot of the different resources that on behalf of the department and managing those. But all in, 47.96 is our current service level. That's about a 23% increase. There is a recommended additional funding. Again, don't fall out of your chair, $6.24 million. Again, a large part of this will be our current service level. This will, our debt service. This will include 2.0 FTE that we are asking for. And then after we make the application of the vacancy factor, like all departments, we're about a $6.10 million request. Again, like others, our vacancy factor on 6-year trend, we're pretty low, 2.4%. So again, back to the average 5 to 6%. You can see financial services has been very successful. We've changed a lot. Obviously, we'll talk about that. But when you look at the history, it's been relatively stable. Primary budget driver for financial services, as I already said, the big increase is debt service. That's going to be the big driver here. But there are some, other associated costs that we have. But with the planned financing that we are going to be doing here and closing by June 29th, that will all be part of this budget and rolls into the next and by one day, I should say, rolls into the current service level. So if you were to, look at our 23% increase, 10% of that is related to debt service. The rest of it, 13%, relatively average to what you see a lot of the other departments. The other piece in terms of personal services, and I want to point this out, I've been kind of careful to say this through this whole time with you, picking out that the Financial Services Department has had a reorganization. This last biennium was really consolidating a lot of positions from both Public Works and the Health Department. So you might remember when I was reminding you that some of those cost centers or those funds had been going down. The result of that is now they are in this particular area. So that's why you see more of the larger increase in our personal service cost. In terms of materials, yes, sir.
And I didn't get a chance to look at it, but I think there was a 2014 study of our financial organization, and I'm assuming we're following that or using that as a further guideline. A lot of that was done before you were here, but I assume that's part of this reorganization.
Absolutely, Commissioner Malone, and I'll speak a little bit more to that when I get into the organization chart. But yeah, that was sort of a guide to us as it relates. I believe that started way back in 2014. I think it was updated again as we got into right, pre-COVID.
Yep.
Of course, there was a lot of stops and start to that, but that has been a roadmap. But in addition, I think both Debbie and I would say that we've had opportunities to now reevaluate and say, okay, where do we make some of the tweaks? So I think we're more in the tweak mode now. But we use that as our footprint. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Again, in terms of materials and supply growth, the 12%, similar to others, we have standard inflation, but there are some increases, and I'll touch on this. Insurance premiums are higher. We have more facilities, we have more people. Similar to as Adam was talking about, and more vehicles, all the various things that comes with a higher cost. We have seen obviously some professional service contract growth as well. So that's in relation to materials and services. I'm still a materials and supplies guy, but the 206% debt service, though, that's the big driver. And again, that is related to our financing on the new courthouse. So categorically, in terms of the expenditures themselves, again, we our largest, so we're not unlike most where you see personal services. We are materials and services, and the reason for that again is back to the employee benefit trust. We are a self-insured as a county, so as the dollars come in, we pay those in the form of claims, are paid out a lot as well as the contract administrator. But the big piece that we pay out in terms of actual claims, that's the reason that we see higher on the materials and services supplies. That includes workers' compensation as well. In total, our FTE, and this is a little, as I talk more about the organization, we're 18.85 FTE. In addition, you'll hear we have a FTE that's in non-departmental, that's under ARPA, but you'll know as our grant manager. So that's additional position. And then we have 12 FTE that Ahmed is the health in the health department budget. We spoke about that earlier. So we have our administrative budget sort of broken out in 3 different areas, so a little unique. In terms of the personal service categorical increases, as I mentioned earlier, that's a result of 8 positions that were transferred via the reorganization from Public Works as well as the health department. As well as an increase that we're asking for is 2 FTE to support our administrative task, as well as greater to have more capacity around professional accounting. And again, I'll speak a little bit more about that as we start to move forward. The biggest, again, the change that we see the most there is in the debt service area. And again, we're looking at a $36 million tax exempt financing that we will hopefully close in June for our portion of the courthouse. I'm sorry, and I should also mention, because I've talked from a current service level standpoint, talked about the financing coming up. We have also built into this, and you'll hear, is that the assumption of the measure, the passing of the measure 2140. Again, we want to build that into the budget. We have all the numbers. If if for some reason the measure doesn't pass, then obviously we will be coming back for the supplemental to back those things out. But we want to have that all put in. And that was a recommendation that really came from, our underwriters and others, that most counties like to be able to build those things in ahead of time so that we're not having to come back and get it. So in terms of our revenue sources, we have probably the most, I think actually the absolute most in terms of all the different types of fund. Internal service funds represents 4 different types of funds. We have our management service, which is primarily our staffing, all of the different support services. We also have a treasury management fund, which we house all of our investment earnings and then redistribute those across all the various funds and then pay for some of our banking fees. The big one, employee benefit trust. So again, these are charges that everybody is paying in terms of for their premiums, for their health insurance. It collects in this employee benefit trust, and then we manage that. That's our largest area. And then intergovernmental service fund, that is specific to our mail service function. As it relates to, again, we get paid by all of the various departments and handle the mail. General fund, we have about 2%. That's discretionary dedicated resources for our property tax collection. So we do have a small assessment we get from the state in relation to property tax management. That's the dedicated portion. The rest of it is discretionary. So that's our one portion that's general fund related. 33% debt service. Again, that's the big where all the dollars go in relation to paying our debt that we have outstanding. Trust fund, we have a very small portion, that's in relation to properties that we sell, foreclosed properties that we sell. And again, I'll talk more about this, but we're then have to be either, use that to maintain those properties or be able to put them back into the tax districts. So this sort of paints the picture in terms of us and how we break down functionally. And I'll speak to all of these financial operations again. But when you look at, okay, where are the big changes at? Again, you can see some pretty large numbers in our debt service management. I'll start there, work my way up 53% current service level. You're looking at 126% in terms of total debt service if the bond measure should pass. Insurance management, you can see that's up a bit. Again, have been some pretty, so have been regular increases as it relates to insurance, but we've also had more buildings. We have a lot more things that we're putting in place that require risk mitigation. So that is a relatively large increase. And then, budget and finance services. And again, I'll speak to this when we get to the org structure, but this is kind of the newer area that we have designed. And to Commissioner Malone's point, in terms of following the map, the plan that was developed, this was an area that was really highlighted by our consultants, say is that, you've got a strong core accounting services group, but you will also want to have more of that analytical forecasting area. And that's really what this represents, is that budget and finance services. And that's where we put a lot of the investments. So again, I'll speak a little bit more about that here shortly. So overall, this is our 23% budget increase from a current service level and 38% in terms of proposed. So I'm taking my hat off now as your financial officer, and I'm going to move into being a department director now. So with this, I'm going to start, and this is where I get excited because I'm just very excited about the group and the team that we have put together. And I think we still know we have a long ways to go in terms of reaching the vision that we have, but we've made some, I think, significant progress. We've got some great folks in place and just really excited about getting through this particular budget process and moving into this next biennium and really doing some great things. So with that, in terms of a quick overview, financial services, we support all the internal customers in a way, and this is really important to me. These 5 objectives is we want to identify and eliminate redundancy. Where are there opportunities for us to do things more efficient? We want to provide all of our counties across the board a high degree of accuracy, consistency, and customer satisfaction. And that last piece is really important to me, is that I want to look at our group, our departments. I want them to feel supported by us, that it's important for us to understand what we bring to the table and be able to really support them in a high degree of customer service. And again, that's where a lot of our finance team is now. We have dedicated people that are working with all the departments. And I think we've seen a lot of that through this process with the budget build. We want to build a sustainable department structure that enables cross-training, long-term succession, and professional growth. We don't want to be the department that one person leaves and then everything falls apart. We want to be able to build a long-term sustainable. And again, I know a lot of times you have smaller areas and it's difficult to be able to build that, but that is priority. We have to make sure that we have sustainability long-term. We want to implement systems, processes, and policies and ensure effective internal controls. It's what we're about. We want to make sure that there's good internal controls in place, that we have good systems. I mentioned earlier, I'm excited about the data mart. The data lake. And there's different types of ways that how do we manipulate that data? How do we provide better reports, better information to our departments? How do we provide better information to our commissioners so they can make good decisions? And then, we really want to, and this is where I think Debbie and I really speak a lot about wanting to have a culture that people strive for continued process improvement, that they have the freedom and ability to make things better and really encourage that environment. So again, just very excited about our department. Over to the right, you can see there's just a quick overview of the various areas that I'll go through, but financial operations, just speak a little bit I often call the machine. And this is where kind of a lot of the magic happens, where a lot of the processing, the things you have property tax collection, you have general accounting operations, procurement, payroll, mail. It's kind of your core services. You got to have a strong backbone in terms of, I know it's kind of funny to hear me speaking in terms of my back issues, but I really believe you got to have that strong backbone. Debbie and her team do a great job in terms of the operations piece. So again, I'll just jump into the areas, but first this is really the result of, when I came in and trying to figure out how are we going to organize ourselves as it relates to providing the services. And this again is very, very similar to what the consultant had recommended to us. So I'm not gonna go through all of this, but just color coding, the blue represents my management team. That's the three folks that you see here today. Includes Lindsay's position over to the right. And then we also have Randy, who is not here today, but we've really embedded more of an operational manager. So that represents, a management team. And we have to, and this is one of the things that we put in place, is to make sure that we have good span of control. That we have people that, can effectively be able to manage the group. And I think the higher, more professional level type staff, you're going to have to really be thoughtful about that. I think Debbie was at one time managing all of that yellow area, and not that she can't do it, not that she isn't effective, but we really need to kind of build that to, again, so that we have better control over everything. So the folks you see on the green, though, that's sort of that new area, that big increase. This is what I call more of the analytical team. These are the ones that are working deep into the budget as it relates to analyzing, being able to forecast out, really look at more of the long-term vision. And then the people in the yellow, that's the machine, as I like to call it again, is these are all kind of your core services that Debbie is oversight as our deputy or controller, called different things, but as our deputy, she is really oversight for that. But then building in Randy in our operations area, we think that that's really important, again, to have kind of that chemistry and being able to give Debbie some relief as well as manager over a relatively large area. And then I already spoke in terms of a meds area. That's kind of that brown area. This is again going to be a critical team for us. They're already diving deep into the revenue forecasting and how do we really watch carefully through the health centers. So going through each of these areas, financial operations, this represents 13.85 FTE in total. That's Debbie, as well as 12.85 FTE. That's that yellow area again that you see. Property tax collection, payroll, accounts payables, receivables, you name it, the whole gamut of financial services. Another area that I always like to point out that's I think a good indication of a strong financial team is look at our audits. They're clean. They're very clean. We have good audit. Haven't had a lot of findings. We have a little bit here and there, but I think over the years you've seen really good financial reporting in place. We're always the recipient of the Government Financial Office Association awards. So it's a very strong team. I'm really proud of the group. Just to kind of put your eyes to the outcomes and outputs. I mean, 43,000 property tax billings and transactions per year. That's what we go through our office. Our procurement team, it's not easy. We have about 250 different types of contracts and agreements that are now circulating through that group of folks. 18,500 annual invoices that we're paying. So this is two people, our payable team. This is where all the invoices come, all the coding, all the paying that's related to that. Mail you don't think about, but 50,000 pieces of mail coming through us every day, or excuse me, every year. That would be impossible. Yeah. Our payroll team again does a great job. 19 personnel action, 14,400 payroll disbursements. Again, I won't read all these to you, but I just want you to know that there's a lot of work that goes through these, and a team of 13.85 in total. It's not huge. I think it's a good level. There is a position that we're requesting I'll talk about later, but this is going to be one of those gap areas that we've identified as it relates to our reorganization. Budget and finance, spoke about this a little bit. Back to the org chart. This is the green level. This is 6 FTE. This does include the 1 FTE grant manager that you'll hear in the non-departmental area. I think you all, particular commissioners, very aware of the grant manager position and the need to put this in place. But these positions all report to me directly. They are management confidential employees, and that's, I think, a key I want to highlight is the importance of them being at that management confidential level, is that they have to engage in a lot of personnel type things. And deal with a lot of things that aren't typically that you would look from a union represented position. So again, I think that's critical that you have those positions in place. As you think in terms of our key responsibilities, I mean, we need to develop and we administer the county's budget as well as all the service districts. So that's a whole process that we've been going on for, gosh, the last 8 months and kind of wrapping up here, hopefully in the next month or so. So that's a big piece. We administer the cost allocation model. So all these things that you've been hearing about in terms of the cost in relation to departments paying a certain component, we administer all of those various models. We also look at models related to fleet. We talked about fleet earlier, as well as facilities with the URR. Those are all responsibilities that fall within this team. We administer the county insurance to ensure that all of our assets are protected. And again, that's a bit of a responsibility. We have to make sure that we are always looking out for protections and making sure that we have good insurance and coverages in place. Responsible for the debt management and financing activities. This is not something that we have done a whole lot of, or at least historically until about 3 years ago. So, 2020, we issued some bonds in relation to this particular building. We are looking at the biggest financing the county's ever done here in about a month and a half. So this is going to be a little bit more of a responsibility, and debt management isn't something you take lightly. You have to make sure that those proceeds are used appropriately and making sure that you're managing the long-term forecasting, which was a good segue into the next piece. And this is an area that I think Jen is behind me, but this is something her and I have really talked a lot about in terms of we've taken some steps as it relates to that, not only looking out this 2 years, but let's look out 20 years. How do we really start to forecast that? And we have done that to some degree, but we can do it better. And there are opportunities for us to really work on that. And I think we have to. It's imperative that we look at as an organization if we're going to continue to grow. So that's an area that we're continuing to develop. Grant management. I know that talked to the commissioners a lot about this. We have a position in place now that is going to help us with not only the direct grant management of going to hear about these non-departmental things here shortly, but how we administer those type of things, but is also how do we help and be a partner with all the departments in making good grant management practices going forward. So, and then of course, just coordinating and updating financial policies and ensuring effective controls. You can see that these folks are really deep. Tebby, please. Yes.
I just wanted to add to on the first bullet, one of the things Rick came in and talked about as we were setting up culture as he came in was not just the development of the budget, but the execution of the budget. And so after this process is done, those analysts are really there to help those departments fulfill their budgets and where are their gaps and where do they need to make movement, or are their revenues not coming in the way they thought they were, and to help them through that. So that's actually quite a bit of a change for us, that we have been really focused on creating this 2-year budget, and then departments go do your thing. And if you need help, let us know. But this is much more proactive, staying involved with them, and that those analysts know the business of those departments, not just what the numbers say, but what their actual business is. So the model is a much more customer service oriented model now.
Thanks so much for that, Debbie. And yeah, and she's absolutely correct. I mean, budget is not just the development, it's the execution as well. And we have to be deep into that. And I think that is, again, a new concept. We're going to need different systems, different ways of looking at things, maybe not different systems, but maybe more advancement in terms of what we do. But we're excited about that. And I think we're primed. We have the people in place to be able to really pull that off. So now I'm going to kind of move into what I call us being sort of custodians of a lot of these various areas. You're not going to see FTE associated with it, but it's us managing a lot of the resources. So first and foremost is insurance management. You can see that, we have a budget of about $1.76 million going into 23-25. I'm going to be transparent with you at this point. I mean, again, it's always with budgeting, you have to look at things as they change. I think this is probably a little low. I think there might be areas where this could grow more. And it's just because insurance is going up, the cost of it, and some of it is the basic, there's more risk when you start to look at tort claims. If you talk to our consultant, what they would tell you is that the payouts that you do in relation to these are a lot bigger from a national standpoint, and because of that, you get charged a lot more in terms of insurance coverage. We do have a consultant in place that helps us to really look at all the various options. How do we keep costs down? But at the same time, how do we make sure that we're protected? So, I point out, insurance premiums since 2019 have grown 68.2%. That's a pretty large increase, but some of it, again, if you look at buildings, the property insurance, you can see there's been obviously a lot of growth there in terms of protecting tort liability, though, is one of the biggest areas that we've talked to our insurance consultant. And again, some of that is, as I mentioned before, the bigger risk for the companies that are providing these insurances, but also we've had some incidents. We've had some situations that, from a tort standpoint that have increased. I think, when you look at risk from the jail standpoint, those are the type of things that are evaluated. So I think this is an area we're going to need to watch carefully. I'm not trying to suggest it's going to go, gangbusters in terms of this. I just feel like we may have been a little bit low in terms of some of our forecasting. I think we have some contingency built in to our management services area that we could mitigate that. But again, back to execution, it's going to be important that we're watching this carefully. And if there are some areas that maybe don't come through as we plan, we might have to look at some adjustments. But overall, again, this is where all of the insurance management area is housed. And yeah, so I think that was what I wanted to just mention there. Debt service. So again, this back to growth areas. So I think first and foremost, I like to point out, our outstanding debt. So at June 30th, with the financing that's coming up, we're going to have about $57.9 million of outstanding debt. And so that includes $8.9 million of pension obligation bonds. These are bonds that are going to actually be maturing in 27 and 28, maybe 28, 29, excuse me. These were issued back in 2002, 2004 to help buy down the cost of a PERS. That's still going to be an issue that we have to look at going forward. So there may be other things that we need to do. We did take action a couple of years ago with a side account deposit. You might remember $5 million. So that helps push down the liability, the PERS, ultimately, theoretically, the PERS rate that we have to pay as an employer. And then the rest of it is $49 million that basically is in support of our it's the faith and full faith and credit of the county. And what I provided for you is a listing of those issues, just so you can see we have the Avery building remodel that happened in 2018 through a note that we have. Then I mentioned earlier the 2020 issuance that we did of tax exempt for the Calapooya bin, as well as the Lincoln School Health Center. And then, of course, the one that's coming up, and that's a par value, just so in case you're wondering, I know you've heard me say $36 million in the past, that's the par value, because we are looking at a potential premium that we would have on that. So in case you're wondering why my numbers are not lining up to 36 million. So again, we have the debt service obligations in 2018 and 20. Those are paid primarily from uniform rental rates. So, and this is something that Debbie and I will probably talk about in the future in terms of structures, but with the debt service in relation to the 2018 and 20, those are actually, you've heard them already in budgets for the facilities. So those are all housed there. So basically the URR that's collected pays for the debt service. And so it's just all put in that place. It's the question is, should that be housed here? I think we chose to do it that way. And I think it's just important just from a budget standpoint that we point that out to you, is that while we're talking about the majority of debt service, there are some debt service areas, pockets that are in the facilities that are paid through the URR. The other option that we could change to at some point is just a transfer from that facilities account into this so that you have all of the debt service in one place. But again, that's down the road. So in total, our 23-25 principal interest payments for our PERS bonds is about $3.7 million is what we're looking at. And then for the construction of the courthouse and district attorney's office, roughly about 4.5. So again, I mentioned those two because the PERS bonds and the courthouse, those are the two that will be housed here in the debt service. So that's how you ultimately get, to the current service level. And then ultimately, in terms of so then the PERS bond, sorry, I lost my track there. So $3.6 million for the courthouse is what we're looking at. And then 4.5, or excuse me, for the PERS bond and 4.5 for the district attorney's office. Apologize, I lost track there for a minute.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So the principal and interest payments, so that is the portion of those debts that we will pay back in this biennium.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is the biggest one, and Debbie might jump in here if necessary, because she can, she does a great job in terms of managing all of this, but this is the $24.9 million for our employee benefits trust. This is basically all the charges that support our health insurance benefits, our workers' compensation claims, and reserves, as well as unemployment benefits and retirement liability. So kind of 4 different types of areas. As I mentioned earlier, we are self-insured. So we fund our trust fund and pay claims directly. Overall, for what we've seen for claims and budget administration for both medical and dental, it actually decreased by 1.4 in terms of from a budgeting standpoint. Overall, our reserves are estimated about 3.3. And I think, it's important to mention reserves here is that I think the aspiration has been about $5 million is what we really want to build that trust to. I think we've seen good performance. I think that we've been able to come in under. I think we just recently got a report, actually today, I believe, in terms of where things are looking at, and it's still performing really, really well. I want to say 82% is what it was. So from an overall standpoint, I think, we are seeing, good performance in relation to our claims and staying within our total budget. We also have workers' compensation reserves. And as of May 4th, we were about 1.97 million. We are forecasting to liquidate some of that. These are older accounts that have kind of gotten past that time period. It's a 5-year time period. And once you get up to that point of there's no more claims, then basically that is paid by the insurance provider at that point after 5-year period. So you can liquidate those reserves. That's essentially what we're looking to do with that 467,000. So the estimated cost for premiums and reserves, what we're seeing for 23-25 is about 1.47, and that's about 22% higher than what we saw the previous biennium. Unemployment claims have trended slightly higher in 21-23, looking about an increase. Claims budget is increased by 14.5%, and our reserves are about 165,000. So it does look like, in this last year, there has been unemployment that has picked up a little bit higher, but please.
So part of that is during the pandemic, the state subsidized unemployment claims. So a good portion of those we were only paying 50% of. So that's why you only saw a slight increase in 21-23. And now the actuals are starting to trend up again because that subsidy no longer exists.
Thank you. And then we also have what we call the retired liability reserve. So this is basically for payouts in relation to retired employees. So obviously we're seeing a lot more of those lately. So we build a reserve so that we have dollars to actually do their vacation payouts on that. And total growth that we've seen on that is about 28%. I think they've been a little higher than what we've seen, obviously more retirements. Next piece, treasury management. So this is a fund, the internal service fund, where we collect all the interest that is earned from all of our investments and our government pool, and those dollars are housed there, and then we distribute those to each of the funds into the wherever it's in terms of the earnings, particularly for those funds. I think you can see if you look at the history, it hasn't been all that exciting. Interest rates have been very low. Particularly if you look at 21 and 22, you saw a relatively low amount. Projected for 2023, though, I'm looking at about $1.7 million. So that's the result of higher interest earnings. And so there's an opportunity here. Clearly, Debbie and I have talked already on how it's been a while since we've had to really think about, okay, is there options here that we might be able to go out? We have a bit of an what I call inverted curve right now, where the short term is, out 3 months, you can get up to 5% in some of these investments. So Debbie and I are looking to really take advantage of that. I think this is also going to be important as we get bond proceeds here in the next month or so. How do we do an investment strategy around leveraging that? So, because that's all project money that we can use, and we'll probably need it in relation to, mitigating cost as it relates to the construction. So I would say there's a huge opportunity here. Again, just if you compare 23 to 22, that 277% increase in terms of what we're expecting. And I think it's going to be even larger as you move into the next biennium. So this is something that, again, we'll need to be really thoughtful about here in this next biennium and trying to give us more opportunities as a county. Last piece is foreclosed property management. Again, as I already sort of mentioned, this is all statutory when we foreclose on property and then we resell that. Those proceeds are required to be returned to the tax district, the taxing district. We accumulate those. I think the big result of this 568,000, I think that it was in 2020, there was a pretty large auction and land sale that was done, that there's accumulation of dollars. So I think it, as we go into this biennium, it probably needs to be looked at in terms of distribution. Do we want to get those distributed to the tax districts? I also think this is an area that I'd like to look at a little bit more and see, we have a portfolio of various properties, a lot of strips, but is there a strategy that we can take on to try to get that off our books and maybe be able to return some of the dollars to the tax districts? We do have costs associated with upkeep in relation to these properties. So we do take some dollars out from the sale, but most of this, again, is kind of in trust to be able to actually go back. This actually is our trust fund. Okay, and then the last area, again, there is not, I put the budget is actually health services, but I want to point out, I would invite Ahmed if he wants to add anything on this, but this is essentially his team. And I can't say enough how important this group really is, particularly in some of the presentations you just recently heard in terms of monitoring. You heard Carla talk about the matrix, things that need to be evaluated. We need to look at this closely. We need to know if we're not hitting benchmarks. We need to know if the revenues aren't coming in. And Ahmed, who, I like to brag about him, Ahmed has had lots of experience with working in already a federally qualified health center in the Halem Bay. So I think he's got some ideas and thoughts with his team as he's building it on how do we effectively manage that. But I also think it's really reviewing the medical billing that we're doing. I think he would say that there's been lots of write-offs that we've had, and that may be okay, but are we doing everything that we can to be able to rebuild those? Or are there opportunities? I know Carla would speak about, private insurances in terms of can we pursue that? So again, I think this is a very, very critical area that we need to be focused on going forward. So Ahmed, I don't know if you want to add anything in terms of your work at this point.
So not really, just to let everybody know that we're working towards automations, which will really help with the process, because in the past it has been manually entered and that takes a lot of time. So we are working to see if looking for ways to automate, and we already started with the providers, and it's going pretty good, and the coding team. So we're looking on doing the same thing with the billers, but so far it's going pretty good.
Thank you, Ahmed. So with that, I'm going to take a quick breath before I move into goals. So please.
And I wasn't sure exactly where to ask this question. our health department, when it takes private insurance clients, does that help fund for everybody else specifically? And is there a way to possibly grow that to help fund everything?
So I think, and Ahmed can help me if I get this wrong, but one of the pieces that Carla had talked about, I think she talked about more specifically as it relates to behavioral health, but it was in terms of the use of being able to bill for private insurance. And I've heard her say this before, that there are a lot of people that come into the clinic and they have private insurance, but because we don't have that relationship or contracted with them, we're unable to bill them. So there is a opportunity, and that is part of what was built into her plan, but the answer is yes. And Ahmed, I don't know if I missed anything or if you want to add.
No, I think you covered very well. It's basically has FQFC. We have what we call the insurance adjustment. And most of the time when someone comes into the clinic and for a visit, we have part of the bill that goes for the write-off, and the other one would be what we call capitations. It's a different sort of money we're getting paid. But the culture was that a lot of those claims were just going to write-off completely. So it's a money we were losing, and we're trying to work and changing those.
And so is it safe to say, Ahmed, then the piece that is written off, there is the possibility that then that could be also rebuilt in terms of a secondary insurance on private insurance?
Correct.
Are there insurance companies currently that we do accept? And can you tell me a handful of them or a couple of them? Just out of curiosity.
Blue Cross, Regent, so the major players,
Mhm.
we do accept.
Okay,
Yeah,
just kind of the smaller ones or the
Right.
obscure ones that are
right.
not.
And it's more focused on like TRICARE or I mean, a lot of Medicare and Medicaid. So, and that was the original intent of the clinics, right? But we absolutely have taken private insurance. But they're, like Rick said, we haven't developed like a typical medical provider. We haven't gone in and developed the contracts with multiple insurance providers. It's kind of been the big ones, because we know that those are going to be there. But the secondary billing has not been there at all.
So when you say TRICARE, Medicare, there's a shortage of providers for TRICARE and Medicare. And are we working on maybe filling that need locally? Is there a way to do that?
As in,
For primary care, so like full,
well, like Carla talks about, getting providers, period, has been difficult. So I don't think there's anything we're doing it above what that is what our primary mission is for the FQHC itself, is the provision of care for Medicare and Medicaid clients.
very cool. Thank you for answering that.
And Liz, we could do some, I'll follow up with Carla as well. She may want to add some different types of things to that, but I do know that that is a strategy that we want to try to leverage further.
I'm assuming that doing that takes a skill set that we just haven't invested in it, because you have to have the legal knowledge to really engage in those contract negotiations with those
Yes.
companies. And I don't think that we really have that skill set and expertise necessarily.
I would say, Commissioner Oger, I'd say you're correct. I think that is an area that is much more complex, and there needs to be a strategy around
Yeah.
it. So I think that we'll have to look into, how do we leverage that?
And especially, I think for that elder care and the Medicare Advantage plans and all of that, that's. Mhm.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and jump into our goals here really quick and work to get us here done by noon today. So the first goal is specifically related to responsible governance, and really what we're trying to do here is reduce the number of requests for goods by 50% for departments. So this is something we see across the county, is that there is multiple requests at any given time. So how do we coordinate this a little bit better? And I think back to one of our objectives of redundancy and duplication. If you have different departments ordering, as we say, red pens, why can't you try to coordinate that a little bit in terms of being a little bit more efficient, but also to also look at sustainability and how do we leverage that more? So it's our goal to try to reduce the number of requests. Obviously, that keeps delivery trucks off the road as much. We're also looking at sustainable materials and trying to increase those by 10%. So that's one of the goals that we have established for 23-25. Our second goal is, and this really gets to what Debbie was talking about earlier, is in terms of the execution. So develop and implement reports that enable directors and their managers to execute and administer biennial budget more efficiently. So my observation is that, we have in Munis, we have a good accounting system in terms of our general ledger, and we use that a lot. And that's how we have managed our budget. But how do we look at each department and do that forward thinking? Because right now you can measure against, okay, I'm at X% of the biennium and I spent X%, and maybe I'm on track, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm no. That's one way of doing it. But what we want to try to do is be more proactive and being able to really predict a lot of the variations that might be ahead. So I think this is an area that we really want to grow in. This is going to take a little bit, but this is sort of a next 2-year goal on how do we move to that next level. So Joe Kirby, so I'm sorry, I was jumping ahead, but this particular goal is specifically related to, and it is tied to our policy package and request for position. So I think as we have gone through our reorganizations, one of the things that we recognized is that we all know Mary Otley, the previous CFO, wonderful person, and has done great things for the county, but she was a critical part of being a high-level professional accountant for the county, and she did a wonderful job. But at the same time, we're trying to grow our organization from a leadership standpoint and really trying to get to that succession. And I think Debbie and I realize is that there's a gap there that we really have. We need a professional senior, what I call a senior accountant on staff. We have a senior budget person behind me that I think does a great job from the budget standpoint, but accounting and budget are two very, very different things. And this is a gap that I think we saw big time here. Not that we couldn't do it, but we had to actually bring Mary in to help us in terms of doing a lot of those support works, a lot of the reconciliations, a lot of the overview of the general ledger. So this is a request that we have, and this is, in terms of our reorganization, one of the things I like to say is that we've been budget neutral. All of the positions that we had gotten in, we did not increase our budget in any way. We moved and changed and reclassed positions all within the existing budget. This is the first time that you'll find that we're actually requesting a position within our reorganization because we identified it as a gap. And I did fail to say, particularly under goal number 1, when I was talking about in relation to reducing the materials, the other big gap that we have, financial services had no administrative support at all. And I will say I would not be able to function well without the person here to my right. Lindsay does a great job in terms of helping me as just in terms of administrative support, but also to be able to help our department and really work on some of the critical things. So those are kind of the 2 areas that we've identified as a key gap that you will see in our policy packages. So now I will say, in terms of Joe Kirby always said to us, "What's your stretch goal?" And I didn't really know, as a new person in the county, I didn't know what that meant. And so what he told me was, this is where you really want to think outside the box, maybe beyond, your area. So I might have stretched too far here, but I will tell you that I think for me, and the commissioners know with my background, I have a lot of passion and interest around affordable housing. And I think that there are so many opportunities with affordable housing and helping the homelessness, but I also know to do it well and do it right, you need a lot of tools. You need a lot of financial tools. And so my hope, and this might be, you call it the Rick Krager personal goal, but it just really trying to help us as a county-wide, establish a way of identifying what those tools and resources. It doesn't mean that the county is going to do all this. It clearly won't, but it means being a partner with the city of Corvallis. They have a great person in Brigitte Olson who has a lot of affordable housing background, but I want to try to stretch it, as Joe would say, to be a partner in lending experience and also some help in advancing affordable housing tools. Now's a great opportunity. If you don't have to look any further than the state legislature, there's a lot of things coming out. And if we're not primed and ready for it, we're not going to be able to take advantage of it. So again, that's my stretch goal. Goal 5, and I'll finish up, is how do we decrease paper? Bottom line, electronic signatures. I'll look to Lindsay again to my right. She's been very good coming in and say, why are you signing all this stuff and on paper? And she's really helped us move to being a much more electronic. We want to do this in our procurement area and then be able to use DocuSign and be able to process things much faster. So I give Lindsay all the credit for that a lot too, but I think there's a lot more areas that we can do in terms of moving things electronically. Okay, in terms of our policy packages overview, and I apologize if I am speaking a little fast, you can always tell me to slow down, but Lindsay challenged me to be done by noon. So and I still got non-departmental to do. So we are at a $6.1 million recommended increase with 2 FTE. Again, this is, we made a request specifically for 3 policy packages at totaling $719,000. Based on the review, the county administrator approved 2 of those 3. So 2 ones that I mentioned, administrative support for the department, as well as a senior accountant. Those were the 2 recommended. Talk about the 3rd one here shortly. But the biggest piece here is there's a recommended additional $5.7 million in debt service. So again, I already talked about the $36 million that we're going to be issuing. This would be the anticipated debt service if Measure 2 140 passes. That's what we would be looking at as debt service. And that will, just for your reference, represent 1 year's worth of debt service, because of the timing of the bonds. Would be looking at a January 2024 bond measure. So that's the big piece. There is a vacancy factor, like I said, but that's how we ultimately get to the $6.1 million. So I've already talked about some of this already, but again, we're looking at a FTE. I'm lucky enough again to have Lindsay as my limited duration halftime person that's supported the department as well as the JSIP project. We'd like to be able to have that position as a full-time to the financial services department moving forward to help us go even further in relation to a lot of the things, communications. You heard Adam talk about the website, our website. I think we'll all be the first to say has a lot of room for improvement. And I see this position being really helpful to kind of get coordinate that efforts and just really help us from an overall communication standpoint. But I also mentioned a lot of the ability, and Lindsay's been involved a lot in our purchasing and how do we coordinate that a little bit more. So I would be looking to that position there. So that's our first request that was accepted. Our second, again, as I already talked about, is a FTE. And again, I can't say how I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I had one question with regard to the website. And that is that I went out to the website looking for that initial budget document that you put out online, and I couldn't find it online anywhere. So
it is there. It's a little bit, and that gets back to the org. And I'll make sure Lindsay sends a link to the whole committee so that you can see where that it is there, because I've accessed it, but it's a little bit hidden. You have to kind of click a little bit, and that gets back to, I think there's so many opportunities for us to improve.
I looked in several places and I couldn't find it. So thank you.
Yeah. Oops. So again, this position really would be housed within Debbie's area, and we're really looking for a senior accountant position that can help us with the coordination of our annual financial statements. There's a lot of work that goes with that. Debbie relies on people to do reconciliations. So again, she has a lot of great positions, but they are more kind of the the clerk level positions, and she really needs more of that higher level position to help her in managing that. Because we're really trying to get away from that point of, okay, Debbie has to do all of that, or Rick has to do all of that, or Jen has to do all that. How do we push down and be able to make sure that we have more people involved? And again, that's only going to help us from a succession standpoint. So I think this was a glaring gap for us as we went through our. The last piece I'll mention is that we did ask for a position specifically for Ahmed's area in relation to having more of an analyst type position to be specific to the health centers, because we're finding that I think that the initial vision was to have a health finance officer that was over all of everything that's health. And that sort of works, but there are two very, very different things when you talk about the health department versus the community health centers. And we need a lot of attention on the community health centers, a lot of analysis. And we really felt like we were short some depth there. However, we also had an opportunity with recently a position that became vacant. And so as such, we want to be thoughtful about tightening our budget belts, and we think that we can reorganize that with our existing vacant position to be able to meet that need. So Ahmed and I are working on that to get that position appropriately reclassed. So again, wasn't funded, but we feel good about being able to put that forward. The last thing I'll mention, this really wasn't a request. It was just put into the budget, and already spoke about it several times, but this is specifically to the $110 million bond measure. And if that should pass, we would be looking at a $5.728 million debt service for next biennium. A couple of things I like to point out, because I'm asked this question a lot these days, is this estimate assumes the debt service cost for a 25-year bond, a 25-year tax exempt bond that would be issued in January of 2024. At an assumed rate of 5.01. Now, the reason I say this, because this is a question I get a lot from the public as well. That 5.01 assumes a cushion, because we don't know what rates are going to do. They've been rising a lot, so we have built in a pretty significant cushion. Also, because it's a 25-year bond, we have the ability to go up to 30 through the bond measure that's built in. But those are built in purposely because we will not go over what the cost is going to be, which is estimated at 55 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. We will never exceed that. If anything, we will be below that. And that's, again, a question that comes up to me commonly is how do you mitigate that? And that's how we built in that for forecasting purposes. Okay, last piece in terms of us challenges. Again, this is always hard. I mean, I try to look at this from a department standpoint, but I also look at it from a county-wide standpoint. High inflation will continue to drive cost up. I mean, you heard Adam talk a lot about some of his increased costs. That's something we're dealing with across the board. We did build in standard inflation at a relatively high amount of 5.5, but that's still, I think when you look at what we've seen over the last 2 years, that's still relatively low. So I think we're going to have to watch that very carefully. You've heard this as well, identify and retain professional workforce. I think, we've done a pretty good job of our hiring. We feel very, very happy that we are, for the first time, fully staffed with the exception of one position. But we also know we have some vacancies that are coming up. And with that, we got to make sure that we have good efforts afoot to try to recruit for those positions. And, that's a challenge. I mean, we've seen that with everyone. Again, I think this might be more from a county standpoint, but overcoming and identifying long-term sustainability for health centers and external fleet. You've heard me talk about this. I hope you've seen seen it on my face. This is something that I think we just need to be really thoughtful about in both of these areas and really manage closely going forward. I think, we've got some strategies in place, but we need to monitor those strategies carefully. Opportunities, we have continued growth of our financial services and really discover, what the horizon is for us. I get excited talking about our team and what more we'll be able to do as we grow and we learn from each other. We don't have a lot of history. I mean, a lot of people are gone. I mean, Debbie here, thank God, is still, with us, but we have a pretty green team in terms of new to the the county. And so, but that's also an opportunity, and that's exciting to really build that going forward. Looking at new systems and approaches. I'm all about system improvement. How do we continue to get better in terms of providing better information? I already talked about interest rate increases. I think that's an opportunity big time. We need to look at that, leverage that the best we can. I want to continue to build on this budget process. I want to hear from you after this is all over. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Is there a way we can do it better? I'm hopeful that you can see that we've tried to make incremental improvements on it, but nothing's perfect, and we want to continue to strive for perfection. And then create stronger business relationships with other county departments. And again, I go back to what Debbie and I thank her for saying, the word execution. This is about relationships too. I don't want to be the department that says, well, that's your problem. I want to be the department that says, let's work together and figure out how to come to a solution. That's really what I want to try to promote as our team. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm done. I know I went really fast and I probably still am behind, but I think I can still knock non-departmental off.
And can I just add one last point to that last one, and that is finance is often, and along with HR, viewed as the department of no, because we have policies, because we have financial constraints. And I think one of our main goals over the next, not just biennium, but next few biennia, is to find that way that says, not necessarily no, it may not be the way you just asked for it, but we want to get to a yes for you within the policy and financial constraints that we have. Partners.
Well, you could change it to the Department of KNOW. See, and not have to change things. Couple points. I really like the theme of centralizing the county's financial efforts, and I know you've been doing that, and whatever you're doing, keep doing it. It's really helpful as commissioner to know that there are fewer and fewer surprises out there because we weren't centralized, and having you folks in kind of in the spokes and the hub of our efforts. I also am thrilled with long-term vision. I mean, budgets, yeah, we have to knock out here in this next 2 years with what's coming after that, who's in charge, retaining, finding and retaining people, and having some depth, I think, for what you do is essential. And so, small one. What's you mentioned PERS cost in this next biennium? Do you have any thoughts on trends? What happens after that? Have we?
Well,
peaked or coming close?
I think, PERS is going to continue to be a cost driver. I think that's the first thing to say. I think if you look at the history, you could continue to see, I think there's a chart we have in our financial statements that show that it's continued to rise. I think it's plateaued a bit because of the $5 million investment that we made through a side account. I think that there are, again, what I've read and heard in terms of PERS, I think it definitely did not come in as high for 23-25. I want to say it was about 1.5% below what they were actually forecasting. So overall, PERS has seen a bit of a flattening. I think again, but it's still going to continue to go up. And I think that we need to watch that. I think there are some predictions out there. And I think I've shared with all of you with the passage of House Bill 2296 and this notion of extension related to retired employees. And because those are natural payments, the PERS contributions, as I mentioned, are kind of like mini side accounts. They are contributions, and there is PERS is saying that there is theoretically a benefit that you will see in relation to that. So, and based on the statistics we've seen, there's a ton of that happening, particularly at the state level and local jurisdictions. So I don't know. I mean, I hate to always say that's going to absolutely pan out, but I think a combination of things will keep rates, relatively under control. But when the PERS bonds come up, I think we're going to have to reevaluate, because that will be off the books then. And, well, what's the impacts related to that? I think.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? Before you go on, I need to ask the committee.
Okay.
The agenda says that this next part is 60 minutes. We're down to 10.
So, Mr. Chairman, that was a complete oversight on my part, that I do not think this is a 60-minute agenda, particularly the way we have organized it. I'm not sure if it's a 10-minute agenda, though. So I could certainly start, and then we could finish during deliberations, or I could just stop right now and we can do non-departmental then.
I'm going to take my 1 o'clock meeting online instead of in person in Salem, so I have more flexibility. I can stay for another until 12:30 anyway.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, let's finish this thing. I will try to be thoughtful of your time. Any other questions on financials, please?
No.
Just, yeah, there might be some other things. Any other questions on financial services before I move to non-departmental? Okay, this one's going to be a lot different than what you've seen before. I'm going to kind of sort of just cut to the chase, because it's sort of hard to compare when you're doing our model of current service level, because this is variable. There's a lot of ups and downs and changes, and I think you'll see as we go through it. So this is going to look a little different. We're just going to jump right into it. From all the other presentations, and as it relates to kind of the categorical, and what I've chosen to do with non-departmental, because there's a lot of stuff in this, is to try to really think of it from a high level categorization, and the functional areas that we'll talk about is fund administration, American Rescue Plan Act, something I'm calling community and economic development. You'll see as we're kind of going through this, the building development fund is really going to be focused primarily on all the construction work we're going to be doing over the next 2 years. Capital improvement program, we'll talk a little bit about that and what's going on and what our proposal is related to that. COVID response funds is no longer, so all those dollars are gone. And then there will be some other programs and services and trust funds. So these numbers are a little bit, again, when you look at the increases, there's not really much I can say about, why, or, the trending, because you don't have necessarily history. I think the only thing I would really point out, and something that I know Joe Kirby heard me say a lot, and I know Suzanne's heard me say it as well, is that $183 million of building development fund. That's a lot. And that's a lot of work here in the next year. And that's going to be 2 years. That's going to be related to all the construction that we would anticipate with the passage of the bond measure. So I think that really becomes our business. We're going to have to be really mindful of over the next couple of years as it relates to managing the budget. So that's, I guess, the one area I would really, kind of point out and bring to your attention. So this is the revenue side of it. So that's the cost. This is how things are paid for. I didn't have time to do a pie chart. I was running out of time. So, but basically what you can see here is, we have a assortment of different revenues that we're going to talk about. General and local option levy represents $44 million. This is, again, what you're going to see is a lot of the transfers that we do in fund administration, but that's again, 44.5, 203 is all dedicated. So these are all dollars that are dedicated for specific sources. Again, you can see the various fund types, and I'll speak a little bit to those as we kind of go through that. But again, that's sort of the reconciliation of the revenues versus the expenses. So let's move into fund administration. So the current service level in relation to this is 35.6. And what this really represents is it's a budget for our general fund, our local option levy, and our management service fund. And it really houses all the fund transfers that we do, some of the things that we have already, made a commitment. So one example fund transfer is to community health centers. $1.5 million is a transfer in relation to that. So these are transfers that are in place. It also houses our unrestricted reserves. And that's another key piece. These are, again, you've heard us talk about $20 million of reserves in the general fund, but this is the unrestricted portion of that. So this is the $15.2 million that you see there. That's off to the right. So again, this is really more of housing, kind of the housekeeping type things that we have in place, but they do represent movements into funds. The one thing I'll mention about the local option levy transfer, that's a $8.6 million that's basically transferred to the general fund. At the end of each biennium, any dollars are left, we just roll into the general fund and we look at those are the same. So it's a little bit of an offset there. The biggest piece in terms of our general fund transfers, if you're, in terms of the specifics, is again, debt service. We're transferring a pretty large portion of dollars, $10 million in terms of debt service payments. And then, of course, there is a small portion here that is in relation to administration. I'd like to point out the central cost allocation. So just like every department, same as with non-departmental, we have a cost allocation charges that are paid there. We also have what's called the state court space charges, and this is essentially the county paying for the cost of space for our courthouse. And so those are our primary administrative dollars there. Any questions on, yeah, please.
The 679,000 is our cost to pay for the courts to occupy space in our buildings.
That is correct. That's, yeah.
One of those unfunded mandates.
Yes, ma'am.
And will that go up in the new buildings?
It would basically, it follows in order of our URR. So they're basically they pay, it's as if they were their own department, but we pay for it. So we charge them just like any other department would, based on their square footage.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that is all discretionary money, general fund, so. Okay. American Rescue Plan Act. So just again, I know the commissioners are familiar, but for Liz and Chris, this is represents the legislation that went through federal legislation that really brought a lot of money to counties and the state in terms of support. For the county, we got about $18 million this biennium in relation to the American Rescue Plan Act directly to the county. We also were awarded dollars from the state in relation to what we call state ARPA in terms of various legislative projects. So this is a pretty large investment that came to the county. We have used a lot of those dollars this biennium, but what this represents, this budgetary request, is the dollars that are still remaining to be expended. All dollars have to be used by December 31st, 2024. So that's the time frame that we're working in. The other thing I should mention is while I call this the ARPA, what I'm also very carefully to say that it's ARPA resources plus any matching that goes with any of the ARPA projects. The reason I say that is because I didn't want to have things spread out all over the place. So Crisis Center is the best example. We were funded with ARPA, state ARPA dollars of about 1.25 million. We also got general fund from the legislature of 5.5 million. And we got federal money for another $1 million. And I wanted to try to bring it all to one place and account for it. So that, again, just even though we call it ARPA, it also includes some of the other resources. I think the other example that we have is the emergency evacuation routes. I know Commissioner Malone, you had talked about that. We also got like an additional $100,000 from the Benton Community Trust that we got additional $100,000 of support in that. So that's another example of some of those resources. So you can see off to the right, these are the projects. And again, this is always a bit of a moving target because we're making a best estimate of, where are we going to be? So one of the things you heard Adam talk about was, we have like the ring topology project and the website redesign. Those are all embedded into what we call the some of the county revenue replacement projects that you see for 484. Those were specifically projects that were named at the county level. But most of the dollars that you can see, there are three really big areas I would point out. Number one is the crisis center at $6.7 million. So that's again, a combination of dollars. That's going to be a large cost that we have. The water sewer infrastructure project. This is for our service districts. So we've been kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with the federal legislation to see if there's some opportunities, but I think we're going to take off on that here relatively soon because it looks like it might be a while before we hear on the earmarks. And then the last piece, and I know the commissioners are very aware of this, is the $4.2 million that you see for local project reserves. And so these are dollars that had sort of been set aside for projects going forward, ARPA projects, local ARPA project. We had one round of funding with that last year, very successful. But the decision was made to hold on the next round until after the bond measure. So I have that earmarked in terms of reserves until, and you're going to hear this also when we get to the capital improvement program, as that we have put that on hold until we know the results of the bond measure, because there may be other priorities that the commissioners need to address. So that's what that represents. And then the rest of these are relatively smaller projects, but happy to answer any questions specifically to those. Also, I should just mention in terms of the policy packages, you might have heard you've heard a lot of things where we're shifting on departmental. So I've identified all these different policy packages that you've already heard. This is where they're actually getting paid from. So you have the law enforcement packages related to their vest and their training that they were putting on. IT, you heard of the small conference technology that would fund this. And then also the health department had a small portion, and that's what's represented of that 0.5 FTE. This was for the two positions related to homelessness and housing. Part of it's ARPA, and part of it is the state legislative bill. So this is where those half of those two FTE are getting paid for, or 0.5 of those two. It's been a long day. Yeah, thanks. And then also very important to us, administration, I like to point out, this is our grant manager, which we're so grateful to have in place. And this is how we were able to pay for our grant manager. Any questions on ARPA? Okay, so this next area, and again, trying to learn from the past and how you had presented things and trying to be a little bit more efficient, but certainly we can always dive into some of these if you like. So I entitled this community and economic development. And these are resources that are funded with general fund, both discretionary and dedicated, primarily to support efforts, and these are kind of more my words, but local businesses and initiatives that help create a prosperous economy as well as various community support areas. So a lot of the dollars, again, come from various areas. The first is veteran services. So we use some of our general fund discretionary money along with a pass-through that we get through the Oregon Veterans Department. And this has been a contract that we have had in place. And again, I'm very careful, and I've talked to the commissioners about that this is a budget that we have, but there has to still be a contract and a grant agreement. We want to have a lot of accountability around that. So this is the earmark, or I'm sorry, the budget that we put forward in relation to this. But in terms of the contractual agreement, we'll still need to get that finalized and make sure we meet the needs of the commissioners and the county. So I want to be really clear on that. So that's $677,000 that we have set aside in relation to that. In terms of how we got to these numbers, just so you know, we used current budget and again followed the current service level model by inflating up. So it's been held consistently. So the next piece is economic development services. We have traditionally funded dollars, provided dollars to the city of Corvallis for an economic development office. Again, this is $315,000. It's the current service level estimate that we have in relation for that. and would need to build into a contract to provide those services, those economic development services across the county, has been the primary support. The next piece is our Benton Historical Society. This is a resource that has been traditionally provided. I believe it goes back to 2000, I believe, in relation. At one point, I believe it was also a specific tax district or a tax rate was dedicated. So this has been a obligation that the county has continued to fund. It is through just general fund discretionary. So these are discretionary resources for this. In discussions with the commissioners, this has traditionally been a $500,000 request. Or a $500,000 budget. I do know the Historical Society did ask for more than that. They were hoping to see 600, but I have talked to the executive director. And I think they're happy and delighted about the $500,000. Hopefully she's shaking her head back there.
She's got her thumbs up in the air.
Yeah, she's not throwing anything at me, but certainly, again, looking forward to working with them and executing their agreement. But that's the $500,000 that have been set aside there. The next two pieces are actually transfers that we do to the Public Works Department for the Agriculture and Wildlife Protection Program. That's about $47,000. And then we have about $92,000 for the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services. I know those are different acronyms, so I tried to spell those out a little bit. But that one particularly is provided to help protect agriculture and natural resources from pests, predators, et cetera. And I think it was decided several years ago that the Public Works Department would take on that service. I think at one point, maybe we tried to contract it out. And so those are the dedicated transfers that would go to them. So this last piece, community grants, is $137,000. And so again, I like to be clear, this is discretionary resources. And these are all for various grants that we have provided traditionally in terms of community support. Some of the examples include we've supported our food bank. We have supported Water Masters, I believe is one of the allocations that we've had. And what we have done is we have built all of those previous ones in from a current service level approach. I had some conversations with the commissioners about this as well. And it was agreed that we would roll those out. However, again, back to, we want to make sure that there is a process in which we have the application in hand, which I am happy to say I've got the majority of those. But then we will go through a process in terms of approving those for finalization. So I did that as all in one lump. I'm always happy to kind of get more detailed if you want to, but those are all been identified within the budget. And then the last piece is just the general administration. The one thing I will point out in terms of the dollars that we get from lottery, which are dedicated economic development, there is a contingency that you note here of 480,000. So there is dollars there. And so as it relates to the use of that money for economic development activities, there could be opportunities that maybe you would want to pursue down the road, but we only budgeted enough for what the current contracts have been. So I know that's a whole lot in one place, but I'm happy to take any questions that any of you might have around those various areas.
I have, I guess, one little question and one kind of process question.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to see this organized, first of all, and in a way that looks similar to the rest of the budget. This has always been where kind of the cats and dogs end up, and I appreciate the structure you put behind it. The economic development contingency. Some of that's rollover of those lottery dollars from year to year, correct? Yeah, I'm seeing Jen nod behind you.
It is. I think that, and Jen can also correct me if I'm wrong. I think one, it is some of that, but I also think the revenue projections that we have is more than what the estimated expenses are. So there's still a buildup of that balance.
Some accumulation, yeah. And with the city having held their EDO position, Economic Development Office position vacant for a long time. There should be some savings there, but I know we have to renegotiate that agreement
Yes.
by the end of this fiscal year.
Yeah,
So
that's a neck, and as I've communicated to the city of Corvallis that, we have put this in the budget, but that is, we have to have a conversation and negotiate the agreement. And so those kind of, that question is what we'll need to look into.
yeah, have we contributed to their savings bank as part of what I'm wondering about, but given that contingency, we have some opportunity there. Should there be something that comes up that needs leverage or matching funds down the road in the biennium?
That is correct.
Okay, and then in that general community grants pot, you mentioned Lynn Benton Food Share and Water Master.
Yes.
I know there was a very small request from Mary's River Watershed Council, so that's in
Yes.
there.
That's there too.
And so it's just, how many grants does that represent, that 137,000? I'm just curious.
Okay, so cities.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You have share Water Master, Mary River. Views.
Third time, sure.
Okay, so the three small cities. The Water Master, Lynn Benton Food Share, Mary's River, Meals on Wheels, I believe are the primary ones.
Thank you.
So the same as last biennium.
And I guess the only thing the reason I was a bit broader on this is kind of two conversations I think we've had is that would be the intent. But this establishes a budget limitations back to, we want to make sure that we have a sound agreement in place as well with all these. I think what we have learned is that some of those we haven't. And so we want to make sure that we're going through that process to look at that. And there may be some different decisions. So that's the reason I wasn't being as specific on that.
I just want to know where we were kind of as a baseline and what was being presented so that we knew what we needed to talk about in
Yes.
terms of that discretionary investment. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Osborne.
Commissioner Maloney.
Yeah, we're doing catch-all here, and maybe we've already done it in a previous meeting, but the TLT tax that comes in somewhere and 70% goes to the improvements at the fairgrounds and 30% goes to the county. Just, I guess, what are the mechanics of that, where is it?
Yeah, no, great question. So you said it all, 30% of the resources go to the general fund, 70% goes specifically to the fair fund. We did speak to that when we went through the NATE presentation. You might recall what we have set aside it, and we show that a much higher estimate. I think it was roughly around $2 million of capital outlay that we had forecasted out in relation to that. I think you all have had, various conversations in terms of that usage. And so, but ultimately what we targeted for was the master plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I broke this next one into two areas. The building development fund. And again, this is a fund that isn't used every biennium. We target it when we're doing big infrastructure projects and a place to be able to house all the proceeds while we go through a construction or rehab. So again, a pretty large amount you can see here of $61.2 million is our current service level. And again, that represents the proceeds that we'll be using in relation to the building of the courthouse and district attorney's office. And then the second area that you see there is 121.7, and that represents the dollars that we would need specifically for the law enforcement facility, which includes the OC, the correctional facility, and housing homeless facility, as well as the child and family service facility, all outlined within the measure. It also includes anticipated state legislative requests too. We built that in as well. Clearly, again, depending on the results of the election and the results of the legislative session, we may have to come back and modify this. But again, this least gets us in the budget, so that, once those kind of final numbers all come together, we can, reshoot or rebalance that budget. And then the second piece is the capital improvement fund. And these are dollars that we have traditionally used to take department applications for various capital improvement projects that range, from anything from data management systems to new vehicles, facility upgrades, improvements, various capital requests. You might, if you remember all the way back to our first presentation of assessment, we talked about a system that they were looking at, and this was perhaps one of the sources. I think what we have decided as a county is, while we have taken applications, and I can tell you right now that, we have over $6 million of department requests. We have held this to wait until the outcome of the bond measure, and then we will decide. But if the decision is to move forward, then we will be prepared. And I know Commissioner Malone sits on the Capital Improvement Program Committee. We put a committee together to evaluate those proposals as a part of moving forward. But again, I think we all believe that we needed to wait and see what happened before we made any significant investments in capital improvement. So that's what capital projects represents. Questions?
No.
Okay, I'll speed through these last few. This is a sort of as someone said, catch-all. I mean, you have a lot of different types of things here, but these are other programs and services totaling about 1.7. We have $909,000 specifically to the state forest and road support. This is dollars that we use to reimburse for it specifically relates to roads that access to state forest lands in Benton County. So it's a pool of dollars that are set aside. I think it's the first $200,000 that come from the state harvest that we put in there. And then it's basically requested reimbursement from the road fund and request reimbursement when they're doing work on that. I will say there hasn't necessarily been a lot of activity in relation to that. I would probably have to defer to Gary more in terms of reasons why that, but these are dollars dedicated specifically for those particular areas. The county school fund's pretty easy. This is simply just a pass through where we're getting dollars from the Department of Education that basically passed into local school districts. So that's nothing more than an in and out as it relates to us. Community Development Block Grant. This is the last CDBG grant that we have, at least right now. We have this is specifically for housing assistance to provide through a contractor to provide housing to rental and mortgage assistance to low income individuals in the county. One just side note to that, the commissioners did just approve a couple of weeks ago to expand that to Lynn County because we weren't using all of the money, but priority still remaining to Benton County. So this is finishing up the CDBG. And then at this point, we don't have any more CDBG dollars, at least on the pipeline right now. And that will be through September 2023. And then the last one is a really, really small amount of money that I think has been on the books for some time, about $18,000. It was Title III money that we got, I want to say it goes back to 2010. That wasn't all used, but this is specifically dollars that can be used by for search and rescue activities on federal forest lands. I know that the Community Development Department has been charged with this. They have been working on a plan, and my understanding is that we'll initiate and have more information on that plan here moving forward. So that's other programs and services. And then last, but certainly not least, is our trust funds. And again, trust funds are dollars that we're pretty much the custodian of those. The mediation fund, these are dollars that come from the Oregon Judicial Department, basically sits in trust, and when there are court ordered mediation services, we basically contract out and provide those services. The Benton County Cultural Coalition Trust, we're kind of the fiduciary or fiscal agent as relates to this. Most of the money is dollars that come from the Oregon Cultural Trust. Business Oregon, I think, is where they're actually housed now. Money, basically a pass through, comes to us, and then we're told to actually make payments to sub-grants on behalf of the Benton County Cultural Trust. And then the preservation fund, these are dollars that I believe go back in terms of carry forward of contributions in the past to help for activities related to the preservation of the historic courthouse. I think this is an area that there, depending on, in terms of the courthouse and moving and what we do with the historic courthouse going forward, could actually, it's only 181,000, but certainly be able to make some investments in relation to that. So that's $299,000. And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to say that concludes the county's presentation of everything.
Any questions? Comments? Anybody online? From the public? No? Okay. With that, we will adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, real quick, next steps, Thursday night is, we have public hearing.
Correct.
And then deliberations.
Correct.
And so I guess the only thing I would ask before you adjourn, is there any, expectations of the committee, anything that you feel like you need at this point as it relates to the deliberations and that discussion? This will be my first time with you, and Jen has said that, we usually kind of take notes in terms of adjustments and things that you want, but obviously if we have the heads up on things that you're thinking about, we could price them, we could look at them. I think, Commissioner Ojero.
I guess the one question that I do have, and something that we haven't discussed explicitly here, is that as we have shuffled around in terms of where our county offices reside, we have some buildings that will be vacant or are vacant. What are we doing with them? Where are they accounted for? Obviously, we're paying insurance on them and paying utilities. What's the process going forward to plan for those?
Yeah, I think, and Suzanne's behind me, so if she decides that, there's, I misspeak here, but I think the conversations that I've had to date as it relates to those buildings was sort of we want to wait and see in terms of what happens with the bond measure, in terms of, what are our needs going to be going forward. I think that first of all, into your question of the budget, they're not built in terms of a revenue source. They're built in as an expense.
Yeah.
And certainly we have to continue to maintain those and be able to, so there's costs associated with it. And that's costs that will go away once we decide if we sell that or we use it for other things. But we haven't done any anticipation of selling those buildings. And I think that's a conversation we'll want to have, I think, relatively soon in our post bond deliberations. That would be that's sort of been kind of a wait and see at this point. But it does warrant, I think, a larger conversation.
Thank you.
Commissioner LeBlanc.
I guess my question resolves around, we've gone over lots of numbers, and thinking about contingency and reserves. I guess at our next meeting, I would like to be reassured that they're sufficient and that lots of variables. We're trying to look 2 years ahead. I guess that's mainly a big picture. We've got department budgets, but overall, are we in good shape?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say to you, Commissioner Malone, I think, going back to our first day, I think one of the things that is messaged in the budget message is that we have reserves at a best practice of, best what we call in our financial policies is 12.5%, and we are basically showing 13.5%. So that was a lot higher, before the debt service that we take on. But as we talked together over the last couple of years, we knew that making that investment would push us down, but we were still in a best practice. My advice to you, though, is, we're now pretty close to that line. And so I think as you think about investments, things that you want to do, maybe that we didn't fund here, I always like to say, well, then what are you not going to do? Because if you do and make those investments, you're going to drop closer. And I would advise not to go much closer. That's been my message from the beginning. I think we've kind of pushed it about as far as we could in terms of borrowing. So to answer your question, I think, yes, we're in a good shape so long as we're disciplined in relation to our investments.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, with that, we will adjourn. Okay,
Use the hammer.
Thursday.
Got the hammer.